All right, we are live this is for the first Roundtable Chill Out Sunday. And we are joined here by Noel Lee and Brian Berletic. Noel, do you want to introduce yourself? We've known each other for a while. I think, was it related to you? When did you start going to doing live show, your YouTube channels? Can you please introduce yourself?
Well, Angelo, thanks for having me tonight. And hi, Brian. How's things in Bangkok? So yeah, I started my YouTube channel in 2021, and it was just an accumulation of me trying to, have a voice in terms of the rhetoric that's being spoken about Xinjiang. And since I was in China, right, mainland China, throughout the pandemic, there was not much to do, and I started the YouTube video. I was on a trip with Fernando to Xinjiang, and it started from there. As for you and I first saw you on TV when you were, in the thick of the Hong Kong protests, and you said something which will always be etched in my memory to the Hong Kong people, is to look into the mirror, look at yourself, you are Chinese, right? So that's how we started, Angelo. Yeah.
Yeah. Just one thing. I think Barry's on. You have problems with your microphone, Barry. If it doesn't work, maybe you might want to try with your phone, or maybe do some testing. Yeah. Maybe get out and you get in again with with your phone if it doesn't work with your microphone, Barry. Yeah. Sorry. Mate. Yeah, we have some technical problems. We tried just before. Barry, you want to try 1, 2, 3 on your microphone? I think that there's no sound. Oh, I think Barry doesn't hear us. Yeah. Well, we'll solve that. We'll find a way. I'm going to talk to Barry.
Yeah, it's probably the sound settings. You have to specifically pick your microphone and your headphones, or it'll, at least on mine, it just randomly does whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll talk to Barry on the backstage. I'll talk to him on the backstage.
All right.
Yeah. So yes, that's why you join in, and well, maybe your story, maybe Brian. I think not necessarily people know about your story, how you began, and so you're based in Thailand, and how did you come into touching geopolitics? Maybe going back to actually your time as a Marines.
Yeah, well, even before that, I just want to point out that I've known Noel for quite a while also, and I remember him putting out videos, especially about Xinjiang, and there was a period of time there where a lot of people were just so sick of the anti-China propaganda that they just started making videos. And I was making videos about China as well, but mostly about Southeast Asia because I live in Southeast Asia. So I saw quite a few of Noel's videos back then. So we, the three of us, I guess, we all kind of know each other. And even though the Western media would say there's some kind of conspiracy, the Chinese government is paying us all to say these things, but actually, I think, especially now in hindsight, if you look at what we've said and you look at the claims the Western media have made, they don't stand up to scrutiny. The things that we say, people are starting to realize that yes, it's true. Noel, you're still in China, right?
Yes, but I managed to.
How are you? How? I mean, between you and Angela, how do you even have the power on? I heard the Chinese economy is collapsing. What's going on? How is this possible that we're even talking?
Okay, the Chinese economy, in terms of what I'm hearing from the locals, it is tough, right? It's not collapsing, but it is tough on what the locals are experiencing. For example, they talk about the property prices, right? They talk about youth unable to get a job once they come out of schools and stuff like that. So that is a problem that might be misconstrued as the economy collapsing, because the economy is not collapsing. I mean, I'm seeing you might feel that in certain areas in the retail malls it feels quiet, and that's what I feel as well. I am close by to some malls. When I go to the malls, I was wondering how do these malls actually keep up the business because it's empty, right? But then again, China is humongous. It's huge. There's malls everywhere, and then there is the online business as well. So I think they are having a balance between having the physical malls there, and then also a very vibrant online. As we're doing right now, right? They are actually selling to people online on the Douyin, on the live streams. As I can see, lots of products going on. Canton Fair is coming up next month. Hustling and bustling. Tourism in Xinjiang is being promoted to go. So yeah, I don't see where the rhetoric is coming from, but
So certain areas in the Chinese economy are tough. Has this been going on for a long time, or is this just something relatively recent?
Well, you're talking about the rhetoric on
yeah. Well, no, the rhetoric seems. They've said the Chinese economy is collapsing. They've said it will collapse in 6 months for the last 10 years.
No. So far,
there's that. But this most recent phenomenon that you're talking about, this is relatively recent. Maybe post.
Oh yeah,
COVID
it's a
or
recent
something.
thing. Because I speak to the locals as and when I can, and this wasn't being brought up at least 2 years ago during COVID. I think it's being talked about now, and it's true, right? That at least from my correspondence with the locals here, the factory people that I know, they're saying that the young people are really finding it hard to get a job, and the job might not pay enough for them to actually get a housing and stuff like that. So that is still a problem. I think is a social problem that needs to be resolved. As China's population is still massive, and I see lots of buildings being built, and when I speak to the locals, they're telling me, how are these buildings going to be filled up with people, because they don't see it, at least in this particular district that I'm at, right? New buildings being built, but then I'm hearing from them that is basically empty. So that's a problem right there, when you have buildings that is not being purchased and inhabited, I guess.
We got just Fernando just join in, and I don't know, Barrie, if
Hey,
you
Fernando.
Fernando.
Barrie, even if Barrie's audio doesn't work, if he could just stay there and smoke, he could take the place of Gonzalo, because Gonzalo used to smoke like a chimney all during the roundtable. I see some people in the How's it going? How are you doing?
Good, guys. Finally, we are out of Xinjiang. We were in Xinjiang for 5 whole months, traveling to more than 40 locations. And it was amazing. Now we're in Gansu and headed for Inner Mongolia to continue this very exciting trip with Are We There Yet? The YouTube channel. Okay, so what are you guys talking about?
Well, it is Angelo's stream. Angelo, you want to tell him what we're talking about?
I think it would be good if actually, Fernando, you if you can introduce yourself for people who don't know you. Just how did you come up to doing like videos and start speaking out?
All right, cool. So look, I've been in China since the year 2000. I came here to work as a teacher, and within 3 to 4 years, I decided to start my own business. And I've had that business for, it's now 18 years. However, 2 years ago, I decided to, not 2 years, about 20 months already. I decided to semi-retire and start traveling around China. I started making videos in, I think it was 2017, but it was more geared towards helping people who wanted to come here and teach, kind of like show them the ropes, as in, look, this is what you need to be careful with. This is what could happen. This is some of the things that your employers do, stuff like that. But then I realized that was quite limited in scope. So I went for something a little bit broader, like just talking about teaching methodology that could be used by anyone, anywhere in the world. So that went on for, I don't know, a year or so. And at one point, and I think this was a turning point for a lot of people, the Hong Kong riots, and some YouTubers who left China and turned on China, and having lived here, having been here, having experienced so many ups and downs, having seen it all and lived it all, you're like, what these people are saying is actually not true. So that kind of like prompted me to start making videos to try and correct the stuff that they were saying, the things that they were putting out, and like, it's not so. That's not true. Like, oh, if you're married, you cannot work. I'm like, no, that's not true. If you don't have a degree, you cannot work. That's a different story. So stuff like that, and little by little, I got more involved into trying to explain China to people from a person who has run businesses, who has had difficult situations. I've had legal cases. I have sued people. At one point, I had one employee passing away. You know what I mean? So, I mean, the amount of experience that I could share with people based on my 23 years in the country are I think of interest to people. And well, yeah, this last 20 months, I bought an RV, a recreational vehicle, and I hooked it up to my electric car, my EV, and we've been traveling around the country, basically making content, shooting content for a documentary that I want to produce by next year. The idea is to have it out by October 1st, 2024, which is going to be the 75th anniversary of China. And that's going to be kind of like my present to the country, as appreciation for everything that that China has offered me in all these years here in the country. So that's me. If there's any questions that anybody has, you can just put them on the comments, and then we go on. But yeah, I don't want to take the mic and sit on it for too long. It's great to see all of you guys. I haven't seen you in a long time now.
Yeah, we just got Lasse who just joined in. Lasse, you want to just introduce yourself? We just had a discussion. I think it would be good that you mention, you introduce your activities, what you are doing related to China.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lasse. Lasse Beusen. I'm based in Vienna, Austria. I'm running a peace organization that's focused on promoting bridges between China and Europe, as we call it. So we focus on building connections between people from China, people from Europe, and ensuring that we are promoting an idea that there should be collaboration between people, that there should be more peace-focused, more collaboration-focused approaches in business, in politics, just to prevent the war that certain parties are trying to start. I could go on and on about this, but the point of the organization is that anybody who wants to be engaged in promoting peace between Europe and China can approach us, and we will find a way to make it happen. I'm not a content creator like the others here. I'm not experienced in public speaking. I'm not experienced in public appearances, but I'm trying to get more engaged with people like you to ensure that the reach of our organization is growing over time and that more people become engaged. And if anybody who wants to get involved watches this, please contact me. Angelo has included my handle on YouTube for you once he streams this there. In any case, it's at Lasse Beusen without any spaces in between on Telegram and on YouTube. Reach out to me if you want to get engaged, and thank you for having me here, Angelo. Very spontaneous, by the way. So
no, it's great. It's great. I hope we can do this quite often. It's important. I think what is important is also not only that we build up a community, but it's important to know that people, they understand where we come from, why we do this. The question why is extremely important, because people, they see someone saying something, but they don't see the whole journey, what leads us to this moment. We got Barrie. Barrie, are you good with your microphone?
Well, I've had to switch to. Well, I'm taking Brian's advice, and I'm just going to sit here and smoke.
Well, we can hear you now.
That's good.
that
You
is
got
an
me, right.
improvement.
I've actually switched to my phone because for some reason this technology in front of me on the right here isn't working. So I switched to the phone, but the phone seems to be okay, and I can hear you all, which is great. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good
Nice
evening.
meeting you.
So how did you start, Barrie? Barrie, you were actually involved. I think you started mainly on the Xinjiang issue. You had I think it was Adrian Zenz. You were talking about Adrian Zenz, the claims, his claims, right?
I think many of us kind of jumped in at similar points, really. Hong Kong was a big flashpoint, and seeing the injustice and how people were being treated and how people were treating their own city, their own province, kind of sparked most of us up, I think, at that point, because of wanting to speak out against the injustice. There's this misnomer that we're labeled with this label of pro-China, and I take issue with that these days, because I think it's pro-peace is what we are. And yeah, Xinjiang was another issue, which then, of course, Hua Chunying, the elegant spokesperson for Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, used one of my videos to smack the BBC, and that kind of put me in the limelight. It wasn't my intention, but it kind of happened from there, and I've just continued. But it was really Hong Kong that really got my back up, if you know what I mean.
We have a newcomer, Harald. Harald in China. I've seen you. You are quite new in YouTube, making some videos about China. Your experience in China. Do you want to introduce yourself? Let us know what you do. And how did you come up to? How did you become actually content creator?
Well, I wouldn't even call myself YouTube content creator. I've made a few videos. The first video that got a lot of views was when I went to Xinjiang. I visited Kashgar. I just did a very, very random kind of walk through the touristic part of Kashgar and uploaded it on YouTube. And over time, it just collected a lot of views. It's been up for about 2 years. I did try to do videos for a while, but I feel I'm not there yet. Like, I follow some of you guys here, obviously, and I wish I would do more. I had more time to do videos. I'm really working full time. So for me, doing videos is a complete hobby. I just feel living and working in China, I feel the need to tell people how different the world here is from what they're told if they just watch Western media. And I don't want to disclose who I work for, but I'm not a teacher either. So I'm really full-time working. And topics, I've been writing for a long time, first on LinkedIn until Microsoft decided to take that down in China, and now on Twitter much more, because I feel just writing is probably a more easy way to put in my thoughts than to create actually videos with all the cutting and editing. So like, great respect for all of you guys who do that regularly. It's really amazing.
So have you guys had any discussions lately in China, for the ones that are actually living in China now, about the Taiwan issue, the tensions? What is the public opinion right now? What is what do people say?
If I may, just jump back a space on the, because I know you guys were, Noel and Brian and yourself, were talking about the economy. I personally, I mean, I've been here, 10 years? I haven't noticed personally any great differences in the shape of the economy, so to speak. I'm not noticing people tightening their belts or anything like this. So that's just my halfpenny worth on that one, is that from my perspective, I've been here 10 years and I haven't noticed any difference, but then I don't look at every aspect of the economy.
Yeah, if I jump in on Taiwan, and maybe it's a good backgrounder, like, I've come here to China for the first time in 2006. I've been living here for now just about 10 years as well. so similar range. Definitely, I see a huge difference to 2006 in terms of, just like how China is developed, like what the cities look like. But in terms of Taiwan recently, I speak a lot to some Taiwanese colleagues who work here. Like I've had colleagues in Beijing, now I'm in Shanghai, and in both places I happen to have people, Chinese people from Taiwan who work here in the same office. And I don't feel that there's a lot of talk about tensions, to be honest. Like, I mean, you can never represent China. When you live in China, you see a tiny little part of China. You talk to a few dozen, a few hundred people of more than 1 billion. So never say you represent China. But in my environment, I haven't heard much tension talk. On the contrary, the opposition leader on Taiwan, Ma is his name. He was in Shanghai recently. He was very, very popular here. He gave some speeches saying that we're all Chinese and things like that. And it was very, very popular in China. And I saw some videos there, and some people talked about it in a very positive light. So I see more the positive signs than the negative ones.
I would agree there, Harald. You don't hear that much about these tensions. You tend to, my experience is, and as Harald says, you can't represent from the handful of people that you meet and speak to, that it's not a representation of anything really. But my experience of being in China is that people tend to hang on the positive things rather than the negative things. An interesting thing I noted, I've seen on my Tencent video feed, is that China's government has finally decided to impose sanctions against the real culprits behind what tensions there might be, which is the arms corporations, Raytheon and whoever the other one was. But it's like, well, that's taken a while. What kept you? And that was, for me, that was pleasing to hear, that they are targeting the culprits behind these tensions, which is the people who are making money.
Yeah. And maybe one more thing, like what the people in China who are political thinkers really concerns at the moment, I think, what people are really up in arms and super angry, and not just on Twitter. That's not like a troll farm topic. It's really a topic that a lot of Chinese care about, is the radioactive pollution by Japan, like the polluted water that's poured in the oceans. That's something that people in China can just not grasp how that's possible in this day and age, that a civilized country that Japan they thought was. There's always this ambiguity, like this kind of traditional historic hate and fear and anger about Japan because of this imperialistic invasion of China. But at the same time, also great respect for the modern Japan with its technology, with its like very, very high civilized society, politeness, etc. People love to travel to Japan and buy Japanese products. And so there was this image in China of the Japanese as a very advanced, modern, civilized country. And now they're just throwing their garbage into the public seas, and it's radioactive garbage, like the worst kind that you can just pollute the common grounds with. And that's a huge shock to a lot of Chinese. Like, how is that possible? How much will it affect the seafood? Seafood's very popular in China. It's kind of luxury in the sense of not necessarily very expensive, but it's something that you eat when you want to celebrate something. Then you eat seafood. It's something like of the higher quality foods. And now this worry, like how much will all of this be polluted? Will it be radioactive? Can we still eat it at all? So yeah, that's a huge topic when you talk about politics. I think it's much more on people's minds. And the whole saber rattling of the US about a war over Taiwan, I don't feel that's really happening in China. And we have to see, even Chinese who know and have access to Western media, they will much more trust their own media first and look at the foreign medias kind of to get a sense of what's being said abroad.
Fernando, did you want to jump in? Fernando?
Yeah, I wanted to mention a couple of things that a lot of people either forget or don't want to think about or like to omit because it's convenient. The first thing is that the United Nations, hundreds of countries around the world acknowledge that Taiwan is part of China. That's written. That's on the communiques. We all saw Jimmy Carter giving his speech. It is what it is. It is still civil war that hasn't been finalized, so to speak, or resolved, but that's the status quo. And we always hear government here in China saying that what they hope to achieve is peaceful reunification. Now, the question that I ask a lot on Twitter and on my videos is, if one China policy is what people abide by, how come that there are American troops in Taiwan? It's not China the one that has troops in Taiwan. It's America the one that has troops in Taiwan. It's not China selling weapons to Taiwan. It's America selling weapons to Taiwan. And all we hear in the media is, oh, the threat of Beijing or China invading Taiwan. What I see, and I ask our viewers what they think, is a slow motion invasion of Taiwan by the United States. How can we talk about respecting sovereignty of China, one China, when there are American troops in Taiwan, when there are weapons being sold in Taiwan? They actually now they're selling weapons using the Ukrainian budget, which basically means just it's a lot easier just to send weapons to Taiwan. So those things just don't add up. If you agree with one thing, that Taiwan belongs to China, why is this happening? Why is this being allowed? It happened at a time where China was weak and could not actually object to this strong influence in Taiwan. But that's decades ago. China today is very, very different, and it's one of the contradictions that a lot of people use to attack the situation, in the sense that, well, if they haven't done it before, why do they want to do it? If they haven't reunited before, why do they want to do it right now? And the truth of the matter is that peaceful reunification is possible when the US dollar loses its power to buy umbrella revolutions, color revolutions, coups here and there, or to subsidize wars all around the world. When the US dollar is no longer the currency that everybody needs to use for trade, that's when situations will begin to change. That's when countries are going to be, particularly Taiwan, what's good is a handful or truckloads of US dollars if they don't really buy that much, if they don't really do that much. And that's the importance of the political aspects that China is pushing forward, like the BRI, like BRICS. It's building the road towards that peaceful reunification that will come after the US dollar becomes, well, not as important as it is today, not as powerful and damaging as it is today.
Right, Brian, do you want to jump in? Maybe we can touch a bit, this whole plan of encirclement of China, containment of China. Actually, we could actually go back even to the Pentagon Papers, and maybe we could touch the overall strategy, the containment of China, and then the destabilization of the region, and also the Taiwan issue within the plan of destabilization of China.
Well, I think Fernando made a really good point. It's not China threatening Taiwan is recognized as Chinese territory. Even the Republic of China Constitution says Taiwan is part of China. So there is no argument on any side of that issue. The United States is politically capturing the island province of Taiwan. They did put their forces there. They are flooding it with weapons. They're doing the exact same thing that they did to Russia all along its borders. The US is now doing this within China's borders. So it's actually much, much worse. That's very important to understand. The other thing, as you said, Angelo, the other thing that's really important to understand is that this started decades ago. This is not the Biden administration. This didn't start under the Trump administration. This started at the end of World War II, and it was the US attempting to reassert itself over China, because before the World Wars, the US was in China in the process of colonizing it along with the European colonial powers. That process was disrupted by the World Wars. The US wanted to jumpstart it after World War II. They were doing the same thing in Vietnam. That was not about trying to stop the spread of communism. That was first the French trying to reassert their control over Indochina, and then the US taking over because France was incapable of doing it. It was a fading empire. The US was new blood. It was able to take over, and that's what it's spent the last several decades trying to do, to reassert Western hegemony over the world that the West had been colonizing for generations. And what's happening now is we're at an inflection point where the rest of the world has caught up technologically, economically, militarily. The West does not have the ability to dominate over the rest of the world the way it used to. We can see a balance of power entering the equation. That is what multipolarism is. It's not China or Russia and China together replacing the US as a hegemonic bloc or something like that. It is a greater balance of power, whereas the West had all of the power, and now the power is being more equally distributed globally.
Noel, you want to add something to this?
Well, it's a very embedded topic, right? One has to go into the history books to understand this whole discussion, this whole subject. But most of the time, people are just jumping on what's happening, what's being talked about on the top layer, right? So the whole thing is like a drink, right? A drink, you have a top layer and then you've got a bottom layer there. But most people reading the news headlines will start to just look at the top layer and say, oh, China bad, indeed they are threatening Taiwan. That's why the US got to come in to protect the whole thing. But no, all of you here in the chat knows that this is not the case. But to the uninitiated, for the people who just read the headlines, not everybody is into geopolitics, is into reading general knowledge and reading the history. So I myself am educated from all these channels, right? From these talks that you guys are talking about that prompted me to go check on my own. And that's the most important thing, is for people to go check on your own. Don't look at a headline and then start reposting it on your socials, and then that's when a lie becomes a truth, so to speak. So all I have to say is that it's a very deep embedded topic. As much as China hopes to have peaceful unification with Taiwan, I myself don't see how it happens. They are saying that it might be done within Xi Jinping's term, but I don't see how it's happening yet. I wish to be advised on that, because indeed a unified Taiwan, unified China is a strong China. So this is just one little piece that is it's like a little splinter in your hand that if you don't take it out, it's always going to be there. It's not going to hurt you in the long run, but it's just a feeling of a splinter. So I really do hope that this issue gets resolved, but I really don't see how it can be done with just the US still having itself ceded into Taiwan.
I actually want to say a few thoughts just to that topic. And I agree. I mean, at the moment, it's hard to see. And I'm not saying that I see exactly how it's going to happen or anything. But I just want to say, if you were in, say, 1985 in East Germany, in West Germany, and you were talking to them and say, like, look, in 5 years, that country's unified. or told people that the USSR doesn't exist anymore, people would have looked at you and be like, that's West propaganda. You're just like spewing propaganda. You're crazy. That's not going to happen. It's not possible. And even in the West, in the US, most people would not have thought that the USSR would just disappear a couple of years later. So things happen very suddenly in world history. Like they always have a very long time where things drag on, and then suddenly things flip and change. And I can see two things that I can imagine. One is really that Taiwanese people see, for example, what's happening in Ukraine. If they have some historical awareness, they also see what's happened to the Afghan Republican government that was supported by the US against the Taliban. And several others of the so-called allies of the US that the US have used to exert control on other countries. That whenever things got really tough, the US goes out. The US doesn't stand to people. And even if they stand with a country, as they call it, in Ukraine, for example, their standing with means that Ukrainians are dying by the hundreds of thousands. So I cannot imagine the Taiwanese with some world like awareness would be hoping or wanting to sacrifice their country's young men for some imperialistic dream of the US. So that's one thing that it doesn't have to be a love marriage where Taiwanese people say, like, we want to be governed by Beijing. I mean, some Taiwanese, they're really proud to be Chinese. They are aware of their Chinese culture, and they're aware that in the US kind of world order, there will always be these kind of lower class participants in the world, in the international community. But there's a lot of others who may not feel like, oh, super excited to be like fully governed by Beijing, but kind of choosing the lesser of two evils. And I don't think Tsai Ing-wen is still very popular in Taiwan, and whoever will come after her on the People's Progress Party, so popularity can switch quickly. And the other part, I think that's very important, I don't know if we've talked about it before I joined, but this experimental zone, I think in Fujian province, where mainland China offers now Taiwanese people to come without a visa so that they can like fully participate in society. If that works out, I think this is huge. And again, I hear this from Taiwanese people who work on the mainland, how it's difficult for them to like get their identity adjusted, because on one side they're told that they're Chinese, but on the other side they have to have visa and use their passports on mainland China, and it's a Republic of China passport, so yes, it's Chinese, but still they're not included in the society on the mainland. And the society on mainland China is really digitalizing very fast. A lot of things that you can do with your Chinese ID card is super convenient. But as a foreigner like me, or all of us who live in China, without this ID card, a lot of things are just more like complicated and annoying. So if China does these experimental zones where Taiwanese people can really feel that they're part of the Chinese society, I think this can really make a very strong difference psychologically. So these are two thoughts that I have that may bring change quicker than we think.
If I may jump on two other ideas on Taiwan, one of the things that has surprised me a lot was a discussion in recent days about Taiwanese passport holders not allowed entry to the headquarters of the UN. Some journalist was asking the spokesperson of the UN, like, why is, if they are Chinese, if it's one China, why they're not allowed to come into the headquarters with the Taiwanese passport? And the answer is very simple, and is very it's very funny to see, because the answer was they can all apply.
Lee Barrett, welcome to the group.
Hey,
Hey,
Larry.
Can you hear me okay, guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
Finish up my
Nice to
sentence
see you all.
with Lee.
I do apologize, I'm a bit
Taiwanese
late in.
people
No.
can
Anybody
apply
can jump
for
anytime.
a Chinese
Okay, cool.
passport, and that would allow them to enter, but they don't. They choose not to apply for a Chinese passport. They want to enter, get a Chinese passport, and that's done. The last thing that I wanted to mention on Taiwan before we talk to Lee is how politicians in the U.S. are saying the quiet parts out loud regarding TSMC. Some of them have said, like, we'll just destroy it, just bomb it, let's do an NS2, and that's it. There's nothing to fight for. That's the main thing. You see people focusing their interest on controlling a technology that is the cutting edge. And in that sense, perhaps this is where Lee can jump in and blow our minds. What we see the development of Huawei with their new technology, their new phone, the new microchips, they're closing the gap so fast to the point that it's only a matter of time before that trophy that they seem to be fighting for will no longer be that valuable. Okay, on to you, Lee.
Yeah, well, what you say there is quite interesting because obviously Huawei together with SMIC, they've actually been working on this for quite some time. They saw the writing on the wall some years ago that America were going to do what they were doing, and they have moved incredibly fast. Now, this getting down to sort of 3 nanometers, it is difficult. It took ASML. The bottleneck in the system is the lithography, and ASML. People say, oh, the US can do it and Taiwan can do it, but they actually can't. They rely on this machine from ASML, the Dutch company. However, something really interesting. I was on a flight back from Chengdu about 2 weeks ago. And as I was on the bus going across the tarmac to get on the plane, I saw these 2 Chinese guys, and they got these Tsinghua University polo shirts on. And I got chatting to them. And it turns out they're involved in a project where they're developing this 2D material. And we were talking about it. He says, yeah, this is like because silicon in semiconductors is reaching the end of its limit. And these guys were saying they're developing this new 2D material that's 1 atom thick. And he says this is like 1 nanometer. He says so, but he was explaining that China are not just pursuing one direction with this semiconductor thing. They have like 4 or 5 different paths they're going down because, as I say, this silicon with semiconductors, you can't go lower than 1 nanometer. Now, TSMC are already experimenting with 2 nanometer. But the next sort of step is optical chips. So instead of using pulses of electricity, they use pulses of light. And from what I understand, China are putting a lot of effort into developing these kind of semiconductors. So it may possibly be in the next number of years, they could actually leapfrog the West. And the other point I'd like to make is I find it incredible where the West seem to think that something they've done, China cannot do. Now, as Fernando knows, because he lives in Dongguan, Huawei alone have a base there. They have 40,000 engineers and scientists, right? A majority of them hold master's degrees. 400 of them are PhDs. They have a bunch of very, very smart people. Now, I was lucky enough to interview 5 of these people quite recently. And the one guy who's the head of the project of the self-driving project in there was like, oh, so tell me a bit about yourself. He said, oh, I'm 30 years old. I graduated from Tsinghua with a master's degree. Now Tsinghua is one of the most prestigious universities in the world now. So it just makes me laugh a little bit when these Westerners think, oh, it took ASML 20 years to develop this machine. China can never do it. This machine wasn't created by God. It was created by human beings. And, China have a massive advantage. You just look how many science and engineering students they have. Just masses. They graduate hundreds of thousands a year, and Huawei can pick from that talent pool. So also look at, let's say if you have one genius in every 100,000 people, China has 1.4 billion people to go at. And this is something I think the West just failed to grasp, that China have this massive, massive talent pool. And on top of that, these like people at Huawei who I've spoken to, they're hungry for the fight, It's like when you speak to them about this, they say, oh, yeah, it's going to cause us a problem for a few years, but the long term, we will win. Because they don't see everything in 4-year cycles, because they don't have to worry about these election cycles and getting re-elected. So China take a long view. If it takes them 10 years, that's fine with China, because in the whole scheme of things, 10 years is not a huge amount of time. But for these Western countries, oh shit, we've got another election cycle coming up. We've got to sort it out. So anyway, that's my bit on the semiconductor. So over to whoever's next.
Last thing on Huawei. It was reported, or something was circulating, and this is true, on Twitter, that the ownership structure of Huawei means that the vast majority of the stock is owned by the employees, by the workers
Correct.
of Huawei. And
Correct.
that means that when America imposes sanctions, when America tries to kill Huawei, this is personal to them.
Mm-hmm.
This is personal to every single engineer, to every single person working at those factories and working in those R&D. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
absolutely,
it's very different from any other company. People are not going to walk away. Oh, shit hit the fan. Okay, let's go find work somewhere else. No, this is my future. This is my. Do you know what I mean? That's something remarkable and makes it able to withstand such pressure.
And I don't live in China, but I get the impression that Chinese people see the attack on Huawei as a wider attack on China itself, and this compels
For
them
sure.
to support Huawei because it's personal to all Chinese people. Even for me, just to stick it to them, I only buy Huawei's, and I'm not even Chinese, and I don't live in China. So I wanted to get back to something Harald said about the Fujian zone, and I was talking about this with Danny Haifang the other day, and I just thought it was such an interesting idea because you see the West encouraging their client regime in Taipei to sabotage their relationship with the rest of China, ruin their economy, just like Ukraine did with Russia, but much worse for Taiwan because it is part of China. And then at the same time, China is allowing people from the island to come to the mainland and enjoy more benefits there. So it's like the harder the U.S. pushes, the more people from Taiwan are going to be compelled to go to the mainland, or at least have one foot on the mainland, one foot in Taiwan. So the tighter the U.S. tries to grab onto Taiwan, the more it will slip from its hands, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I think one of the key points that people need to keep in mind is soft power. People love talking about Taiwan and the potential hot conflict zones all around China and war and whatever else you have, economic wars. But the real problem, in my opinion, to all of this that people like to forget about is the soft power question. And this is what the US is really excelling at, and something that China is really weak at. Taiwanese people, just like Hong Kong back during the protests, are strongly influenced by US soft power. Because think about it, what do Taiwanese people have to gain from antagonizing the rest of China? What do people in Taiwan or in Hong Kong have to gain from trying to split up their own country? Do Taiwanese people really believe their economy and their society will do better when decoupled from China? Do Taiwanese people really think Americans or Westerners in general are more aligned with their values and their ideas and their culture and care about their freedom and democracy? it's absurd. So for Taiwan and Hong Kong, it's the same situation. People are very much influenced by soft power, not by hard power. So while I have full confidence in China's hard power, especially when it comes to places like Taiwan and Hong Kong, and by that I don't just mean militarily, but also economically, as we just discussed. And as Brian loves pointing out every time he talks about China, the fact is that Taiwan's economic dependence on China will dictate Taiwan's future, and decoupling from China means economic ruin for Taiwan. However, due to the American soft power, many Taiwanese people are delusional about this fact and are willingly choosing to act against their own best self-interest. And as a European, I can say the same is true in Europe, not regarding China in this case, but particularly about Russia now. But it will come the point where people will be pushed to decouple from China too. It's already happening, but it will have ever more extreme levels of push. Yes, Harald?
I really want to jump in on that point. I think the keyword soft power is an excellent one, and I think it's very important. Yeah. But I want to say, I see it in a more dynamic way. I think the US had much more soft power, and I agree on Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in many places. It still has it in Europe, but I think in many places in the world, this is just about to change. And there's two reasons at the same time, or maybe three. Like, one is a lot of soft power comes with hard power. If you're the most developed, richest, technologically advanced country, it automatically attracts a lot of people. And while China is getting more and more advanced, especially like in internet technology, IT, these are areas where China, I'd say, is already ahead of Western countries. Like the whole digitalization of how things are done online, the convenience of the digital life in China is really impressive. And at the same time, I feel the US, apart from weapons production, and even in weapons production, it's just losing a lot of its shine. Like, it's not the super advanced country anymore. Not to mention the traditional soft power, like one really powerful aspect of the US was always Hollywood. What has Hollywood produced in the last 20 years? It's like almost only remakes. I mean, a lot of the 60s, 80s, there were movies that were original, that were new. Now it's mostly remakes. A lot of the movies have been made 2-3 times already, and they're remade with some changed aspects. Plus, I don't want to get too much into the LGBT topic. Like, people can think of it what they want, but I don't feel that it resonates that much in East Asia. Sure, there's a loud minority that really like jumps on that and says, yeah, these are the liberators for our LGBT people. But remember, Taiwan had a vote whether gay marriage should be allowed, and the vote rejected the proposal by, I think, 70%. Until the High Court of Taiwan said we're going to do it anyways. But it wasn't something that the people really supported. So here's a soft power topic where the US is pushing an agenda culture-wise that most people in most countries of the world actually deeply reject, which again is a soft power weakness. And one huge difference between Europe and China is, or China including Taiwan, is really the language. And as also a native German speaker, I can say like we're directly influenced by the English language because it's so close to our own language. When American presidential candidates, politicians, even people, like hosts like Tucker Carlson, all the very influential Americans, as most Germans can directly listen to them in the original voice and hear what they say themselves. For Chinese, the same is with Chinese politicians. If Xi Jinping says something, every Taiwanese can directly understand what he says. They don't need translations. They don't need this filter of media to tell them what these people allegedly are saying. And that is a huge aspect in terms of soft power, because it just makes people much closer to what's happening. And Taiwanese are much closer to what's happening in the mainland of China. And again, there's always this highly educated Taiwanese minority of university students, like in Hong Kong, that are the most receptive to American propaganda, but they're not the majority of the population. And I think the more China moves into a high-tech future, the more it will become attractive for a lot of people.
Can I just jump in here? Because I have a little bit of a story to share. I have an acquaintance in Dongguan, and he's in his probably late 50s. He's a Taiwanese guy. And he was telling me he doesn't discuss this issue with his son because his son's like 20 something, and they have a very different view on it. And I get the feeling from him that the older generation in Taiwan are much more receptive to wanting to be, reunite with the mainland, whereas the young are less so. And I think that's part of the whole American kind of brainwashing of some of the younger Taiwanese, just like the Hong Kongers. So and that's gonna get worse as those sort of younger ones get older. So that's the danger. I mean, he was saying that from his point of view, a lot of his friends his age are sort of quite pro wanting to reunite back with the mainland, but it's a lot of the younger people who are driving this sort of separatism, but they're being pushed by the US to do that.
Yeah, people with a certain agenda are seeking to undermine any and all relations between the people of Taiwan and the people of China in this case. So it's the same in Europe. People are trying to undermine relations between Europe and China. And this is done to maintain the hegemony of certain other world powers. And those other certain world powers are usually heavily backed by all of mainstream media and most mainstream political parties in those countries they are operating in. And it doesn't matter if you are in Germany or in Taiwan. There's a very clear line that is being pursued by media groups, by politicians, and they all help each other out, right? And China doesn't have this kind of network, this kind of infrastructure to combat on the same playing field.
I'd like to jump in when it comes to Taiwan. It's important. I think soft power is one thing. It's only one side. Just keep in mind that what the US is selling is the idea of what the US is. It's not what it is. It's just a perception. And people are attracted to a perception which is absolutely insane. If you need to be factual and you need to look at the reality, mortality, life expectancy going down, disposable income going down. People are getting, very frustrated in the US, and they don't believe in their own system. But when it comes to Taiwan, additional to soft power, we need to keep in mind that 20 years ago, Chen Shui-bian, he changed the history book of Taiwan. So basically, the kids now, what they read, it's the same as what they did in Ukraine in 2014. They started changing their history books. Well, same in Taiwan. In Taiwan, kids learned that history of Taiwan started in 1949. And they are taught to hate China. That's what they're taught. Additional to that, you need to keep in mind that the whole society, civil society, has been hijacked by the West through NGOs, through National Endowment for Democracy, and so on. Additional to that, you have a president that has been working closely since 2004, 2005 with the de facto US Embassy, AIT, American Institute of Taiwan. So you see, if you add everything, well, that's a color revolution that already happened. I would say that probably in 2014, what we call a sunflower revolution happened in Taiwan. Since then, don't even talk about democracy and sovereignty, because Taiwan doesn't have the fundamentals. And we are living the replica of Ukraine for Taiwan, meaning that the leaders right now in Taiwan are not working for the interest of Taiwan, but they are just puppets working for the US.
There's one thing that I would like to add with regards to Taiwan, and something that a lot of people forget. When you look at the actual constitution of Taiwan, they claim to be the government of the whole of China, the Republic of China. So not only the island of Taiwan, but also the whole territory and even parts of India and Russia. I mean, they claim more territory than China actually does. But here's the thing. If any political party in Taiwan is to push for independence, they would actually be resigning all the ownership to the land that their constitution actually says that it's theirs. So that's an interesting thing. The constitution itself contradicts this idea of independence of Taiwan. You would have to resign being part of the mainland China. You're just going to be this tiny island. What does that mean? I don't know if a lot of people think about that, but that's something that I wanted to throw in on the roundtable to discuss.
I just want to add one thing when it comes to the Constitution of Taiwan. Basically, legally, Taiwan could not declare independence. They have to go through different steps. The first steps would be a vote at the chamber, what they call a legislative yuan. And I think it's 3/4 of the votes for a referendum. So they need to have that, which would be just impossible. And then they need to have a referendum. So practically, it's close to impossible. But what I fear is that, imagine if there's any tensions, then you could have, there's a possibility of, you get to a point where they work through decrees, kind of martial law, and you have a democracy which is completely destroyed, like in Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine is a farce. It's not a democracy. Because they're using the excuse of martial law. So do not be careful. I would say I wouldn't be surprised if one day in Taiwan you have a soft coup. It's possible. Soft coup, even legally are possible. There are always loopholes to take power, and it's possible. You can work, overnight. You can just work through decrees under national security law. You say national security law with state of emergency, and then you do whatever you want. The same as Zelensky is doing. Zelensky is cutting the head of all the media and all the opponents, and even some killings, under the treason excuse. I just want to, maybe Barrie, if you want to jump in, and maybe Noel, you want to jump in, Barrie? Microphone. You need to put your mic on. Your microphone.
I got it. I'm using two different sets of tech. Yeah, the most interesting point for me recently regarding Taiwan is the fact that the Chinese government, the CPC, have finally decided to sanction the culprits behind this, which is the people who make the money from this. And if I had anything to say to the people of Taiwan, it would be, look at Ukraine. And look at what they did there. And you want that to happen to your place? Come on.
I think that the people of Taiwan are between a rock and a hard place, because you can tell that majority of them, their relatives on the mainland, you can tell that they just want peace. Nobody is really gunning for independence. This is silly talk, right? Independence is silly talk, but it is once in a while being brought up by the people who are in that position, who, if things happen, their livelihoods are not in peril. They are in that position where if something happens, I can go somewhere else. So it's a very twisted situation in my opinion, that that there is, the government formed in Taiwan is not something that was done yesterday. It's history, right? And there's really not much the people can do about it, other than the people at the top seeking this reunification, right? And any false steps could lead to disaster. Any false step can lead to riot, and this is what the people who are instigating, right, the US basically, who are instigating something to happen, are hoping for, right? So everybody is really playing their cards really cautiously, in regards to what's going on, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing. And it's just tough. If I was a Taiwanese person, I would really be just in a very difficult position. I want peace. Everybody wants peace for sure. I want business with the mainland for sure. I just don't want this thing that is just bugging around. How can it go away is the big question. How can this go away?
That's interesting, Noel. I'd like to pick up on several points that various people have made here, which Lasse, is it, do I pronounce that right, Lasse? And Harald.
Whatever you want, yeah.
And Harald, Brian, you've seen this maneuvering happening in Thailand with the NGOs and the bribing of people to infiltrate the government. And I just noticed the other day that one of the American favorites has suddenly sort of excused himself. What happened there?
Well, it's hard to tell, and that's why I haven't really gotten into it. There's obviously deals being made behind closed doors. There was a major U.S.-backed opposition party, Thai, for the longest time. It was backed by the U.S. It was the U.S. favorite, and then they, together with the U.S., created this other opposition, Move Forward, Future Forward. It got renamed because they got disbanded and they reformed. And then they went on and won the election, and I don't know what happened, but the original U.S. proxy opposition party joined forces with the Thai establishment, essentially, and this newer U.S.-backed it's hard to describe what it is because it was an outcropping of the original U.S. opposition party. They're kind of excluded now, and they're gnashing their teeth. They're threatening to bring protesters out. But I think, that if the original opposition party isn't going along with that would be very hard. I forget who said it, but they were talking about the U.S. dollar, and once as that fades, yes, Fernando, as that fades, America's ability, their capacity to make trouble around the globe will fade with it. It's not going to happen over time. I think there's a lot of people in Thailand, even though it frustrates me personally as just an ordinary person who doesn't see all the moving parts, but they're just waiting for the clock to run out. And they don't want to do anything drastic against the opposition. They know these brainwashed kids will someday grow up. And so they don't want to rock the boat. They want to maintain stability until this, this process finally unfolds.
Yeah, I think this is something that I just also wanted to mention is, while I very much acknowledge that the US has a lot of hands and money in Taiwanese affairs and Southeast Asian affairs and basically all around the world, we shouldn't overestimate their real impact or reduce events on these attempts to influence societies, because in the end, we kind of also take away the sovereignty of people away if we say it's all a conspiracy made by the US. Yes, the US pours money into certain parts of society to achieve certain goals, but it's still in the end up to each society and to the people in each society to think for themselves. And Taiwanese very much have the opportunity, as I've mentioned with the language. I think we really shouldn't underestimate the power of language, that the US has some things in Chinese language, Voice of America Chinese, and obviously in Taiwan they have networks of NGOs that speak the local language. But from all I've seen, whenever I see American propaganda channels in Chinese, they use so much American thinking, and I think Brian did a lot of videos on that as well. When they do they write the protest signs made in the US, and so they I forgot what it was, for the Constitution or something in Hong Kong, which doesn't have a constitution, and things like that, where it's just wrong. And that doesn't resonate with people as much. So I'm very positive that Taiwanese young people, even, yes, the big issue is school, because school impacts people very much long term. What's not an issue is like the extremism where people are like, we need independence now, because usually like these like extreme voices, the louder they are, the less stamina they have. Like if they are not successful within a few years, they will grow up, they will need to find a job, they will realize that life isn't as easy. It's not only about ideals. Maybe they have a family, they have kids. They realize, well, voting isn't the most important thing in my life. It's actually the health of my children. It's the income to take care of my family, etc. And China has one thing on its side, which is really the long-term planning, which the US doesn't have anymore. It used to have it a lot. There were long strategies in the US, but now it's all about the election cycles and the quarterly like business cycles of the big corporations. I don't see the long-term strategies, and I think that's very important.
Can I jump in?
Sorry. No. Just a very quick one. Some of us are laughing. I want to explain. Someone is actually renaming Fernando Gonzalo rebranded. That's why some of us are laughing. Just to come to Harald, and then I leave the. Just one thing. You said the common language Chinese. Just to give you an information, you look through the list of media in Taiwan, the 10 largest media in Taiwan. All the pro-Chinese, pro-mainland media have been kicked out of Taiwan. There's not a single one. Now you have Epoch Time, which is financed by the USA. You can see that. There's Apple Daily, which was actually an agent. CIA, Jimmy Lai was a CIA agent. He's in the top 10 in Taiwan. There's not a single media in Taiwan that is pro-Chinese. So you see the problem is that when you hijack the whole narrative, you don't have democracy. The problem is that the fundamentals of democracy is sovereignty, and then it's an information space. Information space is being hijacked in Taiwan by Western interest. Ultimately, I agree with the theory about saying, well, they can think for themselves. But when you are actually manufacturing consent and you hijack all the information space, well, you know what? That's game over. That's game over. You know, and what you got like 2 generations. You got the kids. They learn new books, and they're actually attracted by those media in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And then you have the older ones that actually have gone through this whole experience, and they know, and they learn a different history books. That's the problem. Right now, sovereignty, it's not the border that makes a sovereignty. It's also information space. And this is why in China, why do China kicked out all those Facebook and so on? Because the same Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on, that's what they did actually, the Spring Revolution in the Middle East. They were actually the triggers. I'm going to leave the voice. I think Lee, you wanted, I cut, who was about to speak, Lee?
Yeah, I find it interesting when you were talking about, when Brian was talking about how America were interfering and China's got time on its side. And I think it was really interesting that, I don't know whether any of you listened to the Blinken speech that he gave at Johns Hopkins, and he pretty much admitted that America are like losing their grip on things. And then he tried to really sort of make out, we're going to try and form all these new allegiances, and he's bigging up about Biden's visit to Vietnam, and we've struck this new partnership, which is just nonsense. You know, Vietnam are not going to side with the US in a million years. And what made me kind of smile more than anything is he's going on about how, since we've been in charge, since the end of the war, the world's been peaceful apart from Afghanistan and Libya and Syria and all these other things. And then it's like, but you've got this big bad China and Russia coming along now, and they want to upset the whole world order. And I just think, I just couldn't believe what this guy's saying. He's like absolutely, completely deluded, but a lot of the people in the West are like sucking this up and just taking it on board as if it's all fact. You know, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. They genuinely believe they are the good guys. Like the West cannot conceive of itself as anything but the good guys. They are the good guys, and China and Russia are obviously the bad guys because they are opposed to the West. I was also laughing when sorry, Brian.
No, go ahead.
I was also laughing while Harald was talking, not because of the Gonzalo Lira comparison, but because I have a slightly different view to his. So Harald said that the people have their own agency and they can think for themselves. And while that is true, I think he underestimates what Angelo called the information space. Harald himself is, of course, a materialist. Marxist ideas like that are very rare to come by in the West. Westerners don't grow up with that kind of materialist scientific thinking. It's just not part of their education. Their education is focused on ideology, on values. And I think this ideology is extremely powerful, at least speaking as a German. And I feel like people in Europe in particular are totally disconnected from material reality. You only have to listen to German politicians and listen to their words and how they formulate their statements and their language. It's pure ideology. They're talking about Werte, values. It's Wertepolitik, value politics. It's Wertepartner, value partners. Like the US is a value partner. What does that even mean? I asked my government, I wrote them an email asking them, please define the values that you're referring to that we are sharing with the United States. Please define them. Like just state the values, for example, freedom, democracy, whatever they want, and define them. And then I wanted to take that and make an analysis who really shares our values. But the reality is they couldn't even give an answer. They couldn't explain what values they are referring to when they are talking about values, even though every time they talk, every single speech by Annalena Baerbock, our foreign minister, contains the word values. They cannot define those values.
They love this term. They love this term, values. The values that they're talking about are the values of the 1%, that they convince the 99% are their values. It's interesting. It's nice to hear, actually, that gentlemen here are now not just saying the US, because, of course, it's not just the US. It's all of them. It's the UK. It's the old families of Europe. It's the old money. It's the same gang it's been for 2,000 years. So the US, the MIC, don't care what you say about them because they're making money. So they're taking the fall. They're like the fall guy for the empire. And the empire is the same as it's been for 2,000 years. It's all of them,
and I want to respond to Lasse as you've refuted my view, which I find great that we have some discussions here as well. We could probably do a whole live stream about that whole topic, whether ideology or material facts are more relevant. And I think it's also a question of time. So my point is, in the short term, you're right. Like the US have excellent script writers. They have beautiful sounding narratives. But in the end, if people cannot feed their families, these narratives are hollow. And I think that's what's happening for Germany. And I think, actually, to be honest, Germany is going down a very, very dark path. And I have a very, very pessimistic view of Europe in general, and especially for Germany. And Baerbock and Habeck, those two green leaders, they are a big part of this. I'm shocked that the whole industry, the German industry leaders, Volkswagen, Mercedes, these really big and traditional, powerful companies, and their workers' unions as well, that they're all quiet. Like that They are
not. I have some insight into that, working with people in those industries. They are very much opposed to the overall line of the German government. However, the Green Party has systematically reduced the amount of influence industry leaders have on German politics. It was a big component of German foreign policy in the past, but there were concerted efforts by US aligned, and I'm not saying US is at fault for everything, but in this case, US aligned politicians have pushed for the removal of German industry influence on German politics, especially foreign policy. And that was done under Annalena Baerbock as extremely as never before seen. Yeah.
Yeah. No, my point is that
Sorry.
eventually it can lead to a massive backlash, and I think sooner or later that will come in Germany when it really gets deindustrialized and like lots of people's living standards decline. This will lead to a massive backlash, and the same threat is there for Taiwan. I mean, it doesn't even need an embargo by mainland China. It's just the fact that Taiwan does not have the technological edge and the financial edge so that Taiwanese own all the factories on mainland China. That's changing right now. And once that's happening, what does Taiwan really have over China? Now the microchips are next to fall in this piece, like in this domino of industries where mainland China is overtaking Taiwan. And I think, again, that's very, very relevant in what people say. It's not the only thing, but narratives can only carry you so far while you're financially and technologically advanced. Once you're not, nobody cares about narratives of the Philippines, of South Africa, even like South Americans. There are excellent speech writers, there are excellent politicians who are really good speakers. Nobody cares about them because their countries aren't powerful. So soft power is always related to hard power as well.
It is.
Right.
Can I just say regarding economies and can you feed your family? I was in Thailand recently and I met up with a few British people traveling to Thailand. It's 20 quid. Hang on, here, look at this. Box of these right now in England. It's 20 quid. Jesus fucking Christ. What the fuck? Excuse my language, but people are getting pissed off.
I mean, feeding your family on cigarettes is the best example.
It's my main diet. I mean, I buy this and it's 20 kwai for half a kilo.
One last point, and I don't want to make this entire conversation about Europe, so I will shut up about responding to Harald one last time. So yes, hard power is is very important. Soft power follows hard power in many cases. However, I think here there's a very big risk that it doesn't. There's a very big problem with the ideological views of people of young generations, especially in Europe, and this is also relevant to Taiwan. The problem is anti-socialist education, particularly in Eastern Europe. Okay, and I can give you a very clear example of how soft power does not necessarily follow hard power, but how soft power dictates material decisions made by people. So, for example, when the USSR was being dissolved, right? You know this history. There was this referendum where all of the different countries of the USSR were asked, or the populations of those countries were asked, do you want to dissolve the USSR or do you want to maintain the USSR as a union of Soviet republics? And the overwhelming majority of people supported the USSR to stay, to remain. They did not want to resolve the USSR. This includes even Ukraine. Even in Ukraine, over 70% of the population before the USSR's dissolution wanted the USSR to remain. They wanted to be part of a union, of a socialist union. And the reality is, even today, those old generations still prefer socialism to capitalism and want the USSR back. It is the young generations that are driven by pure ideology who are opposed to the old ways, so to say. And this is also true in Germany, but even more to an even more extreme degree. For example, there was a recent poll from 3 months ago where 2/3, so the majority of East Germans said they want a return of East Germany. 2/3 of East Germans do not want to live in the current version of Germany as it exists. They want the GDR back, the German Socialist Republic. So, considering that not only the hard facts say certain things are better than others, like socialist countries are outperforming capitalist countries, especially China is outperforming everyone at the moment, and the USSR was outperforming many other countries that are capitalist, but also the ideology of the people say they want to return to a different state of country, even both of these things align, there's still the strong, extremely strong soft power by the United States and by liberals that prevents this material change, and it's guided by pure ideology, disconnected from material reality, both economically and ideologically.
Is it ideology or is it naked capitalism? I'm not sure that's an ideology.
Well, I would say that you guys are all, in a way, you're all right, because as Angelo said, information is a domain. First of all, welcome, Xiangyu. Speaking of Taiwan, it looks like you're still doing your national service.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Hold on.
It's actually Angelo's Roundtable, but
No,
I
please.
was already talking. Okay.
Please help
So
me out.
I just wanted to say information space is a domain as important to defend as your air, your land, your shores. As Harald says, though, and I've actually seen this here in Thailand, there were waves of U.S. interference. There was actually a very bizarre period of time where there was a so-called Communist Party of Thailand that was actually being backed by the U.S. It was not a genuine communist movement. As soon as the Vietnam War was over, it evaporated. Some of the young people who were part of that, who were victims of this soft power that the U.S. was covertly wielding here today, as older people, just as Harald says, they had to make ends meet. They had to get in tune with reality because they weren't going to be able to feed themselves or their families. Now they are the most vocal defenders of Thailand against U.S. interference today. But at the same time,
nice.
I'm agreeing with everyone, because I'm going to get to the part where Lassie is saying soft power can have a very immediate and intense impact. And just think about what it means. Your young people are busy trying to burn a city down instead of being the new blood for building your country. So it's a little bit of everything that everyone has said. You're all actually right. Those young people are eventually going to grow up and grow out of it, but the damage was done. So this is something that countries have to take serious. I think China's mainland does take it seriously. They have secured their information space. Russia has secured their information space, but in places like Hong Kong or Taiwan, not so much. And so that's why you have problems there and not the same problems on the mainland. So it is something that has to be addressed. But it also is something that young people do eventually. Not all of them, but a lot of them do grow out of it. I've seen it here in Thailand. These young kids today, they would not be talking about these things if the U.S. was not pumping money. It's the dumbest things. They're contrived narratives. They will grow out of it, though, because they're going to realize that this isn't reality. And if they want to live any type of life, they're going to have to get in touch with the reality.
I'd like to jump in. Just if Xiangyu, you could actually give us some information about information space in Taiwan. Which media are present in Taiwan? Do we find any pro-Chinese, pro-reunification voices in Taiwan and media as well? And including also I'd like to understand about the education, the books, history books that are actually taught now in Taiwan.
So this is a very interesting question. There was one news outlet, CTI, that was known to be a little bit more amicable towards the mainland, and it is founded by local born and bred food product conglomerate. They call it Want, and that was one of the only news outlets without partial ownership by U.S. fund managers and whatever. And they lost their broadcasting license a few years ago, and on basically trumped up charges. So yeah, most of the media now is what I've always said is media in Taiwan is basically Western mainstream media translated into Chinese. So there's an extra layer of censorship. What does get to be translated into Chinese and what doesn't? Because there's a lot of people here who know who know English. But those people tend to be a little bit more domesticated by Western, like, the civil society institutes, the NGOs and all that. Whereas the people who are on the ground, who are more working class, tend to not have access to the English language and English language media. So yeah, there's that. And I mean, I don't know if people know this, but Taiwan separatism used to be illegal in Taiwan. People who went around saying Taiwan's an independent country would get thrown in jail. So needless to say, back during those days, the history books would emphasize how we're Chinese, although it is a alternative Chinese patriotism, because it was also very anti-communist. Now, during that time, the U.S. So basically, the U.S. supported the Chiang Kai-shek regime because it wanted to prevent Taiwan from becoming red. Now, at the same time, Chiang Kai-shek had too many of his own ideas, so the U.S. also needed to keep him under control. So they covertly supported separatists. Now, the separatist movement up until the 1980s, their activities were mostly in Japan and the U.S. Later, mostly in the U.S. And their activities in Taiwan were very limited because they would get thrown in jail, and it was also just a very fringe ideology over here. But 86 or 87, I believe, when the ban on opposition parties was lifted, all of these people were sent back. Well, not all, but like a lot of these people were sent back to Taiwan, and they wormed their way up into power eventually. With the current forming the what is now the current incumbent party, the Democratic Progressive Party. So there's that. And when it was first elected in 2000, the curriculum, because if you look at think about when you went back to school and when you started going to school in America, what do you learn in like kindergarten or first grade? You start learning things about like the history of your country and all that. So that was basically the case over here. You start going to primary school, you learn about Chinese history, so you can connect with it and identify with it. But then in 2000, in the early 2000s, they changed it. So Chinese history was very de-emphasized, and it basically became a part of world history. Whereas back then, like Chinese history was domestic history, and Taiwanese history was taught as a subset of Chinese history. Now it's like, okay, we're going to teach kids Taiwanese history, which only has 400 years of recorded history. So versus 5,000 years recorded history on of all of Chinese history is like 3,000 to 4,000. But anthropological shit goes back like 5,000 or more. So it's that sort of thing. So that's how like you started getting a generation of people here who don't really identify as Chinese. Like what Brian said, a lot of it, follow the money, because don't just follow the discourse, follow the money, because the discourse always follows the money.
Absolutely.
Follow the money.
And
Exactly.
that's one thing that I keep thinking when I follow politics, and when you follow, for example, Joe Biden. Who in their right minds thinks that Joe Biden is actually calling the shots? Who in their right mind thinks that Joe Biden is actually making decisions and running the country?
Well, one of my
So,
friends, sorry.
everything, God save the Queen. Everything that politicians say matter to a certain depth only. What actually moves the world and is harder to follow and harder to predict where it will go and how it will behave and how things will actually unravel are the powers behind the curtains, are the people who are actually moving the pieces on the chessboard, really not concerned about who is in the White House, who's sitting there, who's doing this or that. That's a completely different discussion when we talk about those powerful economic groups and blocks that decide the fate of nations around the world.
Can I just plug someone? I would like
Sure.
to plug Ben Norton and Aaron Good, who did an amazing series on the US deep state. It's a genuine American historian, is that correct? Aaron Good, who is discussing with Ben Norton the history of the US deep state, how it developed, and how it functions behind the actual democratic government.
And the same is true to any other powers that come behind the US. The same is true of Australia, the same is true of the UK, the same is true of Canada. So that's when it gets a little bit more difficult to be able to understand where things are headed. For example, through Brian, I was actually introduced to this RAND company, RAND Corporation. And when you start reading those reports, you actually begin to understand the policies that we see are just the facade. What's actually taking place is, well, a scheme, a series of steps designed to achieve, well, what I like to call the murderous, terrorist, hegemonic American regime, and to keep it where it is. So
except it's not just America, it is all of them. It's the Anglo-Zionist Empire. Angelo, you tweeted something recently, I saw it, and it struck me because you didn't point a finger to America. You didn't point a finger to... You did what I do, which is to say it's all of them. Nothing's changed. It's the Anglo-Zionist Empire, which uses Israel as their headquarters, and they've controlled everything for the past 2,000 years. And to point just at America, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really important. The thing is that for lots of viewers, we try to simplify, because if you start talking about directly about globalist elites, it might confuse a lot of people. What is happening is that there are higher powers, bigger powers. Those are the biggest corporation, very large families, that they are the ones actually holding the informal power. The whole system, when we look at our leaders, I did actually a video recently, I did some studies, very serious study. I suggest you guys, you go into Wikipedia and you check list of attendees of Bilderberg Group, okay? You go through that and you actually look at the dates. When they went to the Bilderberg Group, you realize that 1 to 3 years later, they are being elected. I give you an example. Bill Clinton, he went 3 years, when he was a governor, he went 3 years before being elected, he went to the Bilderberg Group. Macron, the same. Edouard Philippe, probably the next president of France, he did the same. And the list is very big, but every time they have one thing in common, every time it's a few years before. So there is a system of pre-selection. And who's behind? And what happens is that this is a whole process. Emmanuel Macron, he went to, I take this example, but you can take many, every time it's like this. Meloni is the same. You know, she was co-opted by the Aspen Institute, which is a derivative of the World Economic Forum. Macron, he went through the French-American Foundation. When you look at the profile of that foundation, so he's an alumni, the profile, it says clearly that it's working for the interest of the US. So you have a French president that was co-opted, and then he goes through that. And then the final round, it's Bilderberg Group. Bilderberg Group, I associate this to the same as a mafia. When you are being made man, you go through that. You've gone through all the steps, and you are made man, you become untouchable, and that's the final agreement. You are with us, and you cannot leave the organization. So you see, and who's behind that is really important. Those are big corporations, big families, and they don't think in terms of countries, they think about the 1%. Because ultimately, this project of New World Order will be about destruction of nation state, and we are going to be a big market for them, and it's going to be all about control. Sorry, that's a long one, but it's really important sometimes to step out and say, well, careful, you know, because the first victims of these systems are Americans themselves. So whenever we say, you know, we keep on saying the US, it's not. And we need to, sometimes I feel like I need to apologize, because you know what? They are so oppressed. It's probably, you know, when you have a country that 40% of the population that believes in the system, 70% don't believe, absolutely don't believe. And the only one that believe, they don't realize that they're being played. They antagonize. It's divide and conquer. And they antagonize not on material issues. They're antagonizing on ideology, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, conservative LGBT. Because the system doesn't want to get people to have the class consciousness. Class consciousness meaning, you know what? We are the 99%.
Yeah.
Stop messing around about all those details, because identity, that's nothing. That's how they play you. Sorry, guys.
Working class in identities. That's exactly how it's done. I'm about to jump off. It was a great pleasure to talk to you all. I just want to leave with one last thought that we haven't really touched upon, the question, how important are mainstream media still? In an age where an Alex Jones, a Tucker Carlson get far bigger audiences than what's left of a CNN. Now even Fox is collapsing. And I would also love to hear Xiangyu's point, like view how that is in Taiwan. Do people really care that much about mainstream media still? Do they care much more about bloggers, about YouTubers, maybe even what they see on Bilibili and mainland Chinese, channels? So yeah, again, I'm about to leave, but just that's one thought that I have. How is the media landscape changing, and what does that mean for the information space warfare? It's great talking to you
Cheers,
guys.
Harold. Good one.
Yeah, nice to meet Harald.
Nice to meet you. And
I'd like to touch on what Harold just mentioned about the information and media. So I think like everything doesn't happen overnight, but the fact that it is happening, what he just mentioned about how independent journalists, independent media source is on platforms, giving the rhetoric, giving at least their side, hopefully with compare and contrast versus just another brainwashing episode, I think it's happening, right? But what we always have to be cautious about is always the big brother, the guy that actually can stamp you out just like that with a click of a button. Your channel is gone. I say this because, for example, in my industry, when I'm doing something that is against what is happening, then the people who are involved would send you a cease and desist, right? They will take the lawyers and they will shut you down, which is true, right? If I infringe on a copyright, of course, I'll get a cease and desist to stop doing the copyright infringement. So the same thing happens here. I mean, the fact that we're still on this YouTube speaking to everybody and not being shut down is for me actually quite mind-blowing, right? Obviously, Angelo, Brian, you're always on the channel speaking about the Ukraine war, giving that side of the rhetoric that I'm sure the people who are involved doesn't want you talking about it. That's why I'm surprised that our channels are not like wiped off. So hopefully, as much as you can, what was mentioned earlier, right? People might not be viewing the mainstream media anymore because I guess number one, in today's context, we don't really watch the TV. We are having other medias on our phones, and that includes the YouTubes, the TikToks, all these things. So slowly but surely, we are phasing out from needing to hear from a newscaster on the 9 p.m. news. We are getting our news from whatever that we wake up to in the morning. It could be fake news. It could be somebody's rant. But it is this media that's taking over. And hopefully more and more people like ourselves, and the vloggers who are trying to get out there, even if they're talking about food, even if they're talking about just life in general, not specifically geopolitics. These are the real transformation I feel that is coming towards the media, what people are receiving, what they're consuming, and hopefully they're consuming the right things, because obviously you can consume either poison or the correct stuff. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on this thing.
There's a thing that I wanted to add with regards to mainstream media. Mainstream media in America, at least, is owned by only a few corporations. Every single channel, every single show, everything. And you have channels and you have news news programs and whatever that are actually contradicting each other. And I think that that's probably the most dangerous aspect of Western media nowadays, in that in search of advertiser revenue, in search of clicks, in search of views and whatnot, you divide your audiences. You provide a certain kind of information that is going to feed the bias of a certain audience. And the same owner has another channel that feeds you the other side of the story, that feeds you the contradicting side of the story. So masks don't work, or masks are necessary.
And it's a fake
Vaccines don't
contradiction.
work,
It's a fake
or
one.
exactly. So these owners of media are raking in the money in the billions of dollars by providing contradicting information. What that does is the audience is left not knowing what's true and what's not. Not knowing, is Fox telling me the truth or is MSNBC telling me the truth? And you are left to follow your biases. You are left to follow your gut, your instinct, what you, but you are left alone with this void of truth. Now, those with the inclination to do research and find out more end up in channels like ours or like other people's, right? And they're like, oh, they start to build a little bit of a foundation towards finding the truth. But the vast majority of people, are not inclined to do the homework. So
Yeah, the vast majority of people just read a headline.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good quote by William Casey, the former CIA director. You probably have all heard it. I don't know what the exact quote was, but I think it was, we'll know our program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. So, I think he gave this as an answer when he was asked what the goal of the CIA is, like, what is the goal of your agency? And he says, we want all Americans to only believe false things. So, yeah.
So
Xiangyu,
in this space, then you end up with bloggers or with commentators like us fighting against these giants, these titans that dominate the airwaves. That not only that, but as Noel was saying, well, some of them have the power to push the button and just eliminate whatever you've created through the years. Brian can speak to this, having experienced that several times with Twitter or now X. So it's such a minefield trying to deliver information that people can use to correct some of the narrative that they've been fed. Sorry, I was interrupting you.
no, I was just going to ask Xiangyu because Harald asked, what is the situation regarding the mainstream media in Taiwan? Do ordinary people care about mainstream media in Taiwan, or are they getting their news from somewhere else?
Most people are still getting the bulk of their information from mainstream media, and you'll find that a lot of the big YouTubers, I mean, the DPP is pretty smart. Call them what you want. They're certainly not dumb. The Taiwan administration's already formed partnerships with some of the biggest YouTubers, so they've pretty much got that under control. There's a few other alternative voices on YouTube, but they're just not very. They're not really well made. They're not very. They might be pro mainland in some ways, but not really anti-Western hegemony. They don't really bring up Western hegemony or U.S. imperialism or those things. Not like to the level of detail that some of the people that are speaking here do. So yeah, that's an area of improvement.
Yeah, I think to follow up on all these channels, right? Channels and platforms. Sometimes you just really have to go in with a critical mind, and you have to, right? Every single channel, in my opinion, has their own agenda. Like it or not, there's our own agenda, right? We want to sway our audience in what we want them to believe. But I just ask for these channels to at least have some balance, because, for example, when we talk about the like, there's a big channel called The Redacted. I remember them speaking about the other side of the Ukraine war, which I believe was more sound, because they highlighted that, you know, it's not all about Ukraine bad. I'm sorry, Russia bad. You know, yeah. So they were trying to bring some balance into the Ukraine war, saying that there's a side of it there's Russia that is doing whatever, right? So I don't want to get into too much details. But on the flip side, yeah. So they were saying that they have boots on the ground. Yeah, I remember now. So they were saying that they have boots on the ground in Ukraine. Hence, they are showing the other side of the war, where actually Russia is doing this and this, right? But then again, they were reporting on China, but they have no boots on the ground. And they were talking about all these things about COVID restrictions and all these things. So I just beg of the big channels to do your due diligence and report on just be fair. You know, don't say one thing and then go about 180 and say the other thing. That for me just you know, it just brings down the credit of that particular channel, that I was like, okay, this is something good. This is something good. So I will start to question everything that they say, because whatever that they say that to me is correct, because I can validate it from other channels. Okay, that is good. But the rest of the stuff now, I can't just take it on face value. That's my take.
I'm going to bid you a good evening, gentlemen. I'd like to leave you, as Harald did, with a parting thought. We, in my opinion, are what I consider to be the cognoscenti. That is, those people who study and look at the world and current affairs and what is going on, what might go on, what has been going on. And we talk about it a lot. And it's kind of why I've ducked out of the whole thing over recent times, mainly also because I'd rather be doing music. But my parting thought is this. I believe it is up to the likes of us not to just talk about it, but to say, what are you going to do? And actually give people some advice. And you could say, well, who are we to give advice? But somebody's got to. People need leaders. People need to be told, because people move in flocks like shoals of fish. And this is why the media has such control. And my parting thought is an Americanism. Well, what are you going to do?
Thank you. Fully agreed, Barrie.
I think earlier there was some talk about the deep state, and I know this term is thrown around a lot. You have the far right calling everything deep state and blaming, and then associating it with a certain group of people, while you have leftists who will just say, "Oh, if you speak about the deep state, then you're just a far right conspiracy theorist." But I mean, if you the deep state, it's a bunch of like unelected people and you know, the alphabet agencies pulling the strings behind, working on for the interest of powerful people. And I do want to mention, you guys here are familiar with the business plot, correct?
Sorry, again?
You guys here are familiar with the business plot, right?
The business plot? No.
Maybe you're not familiar with the name, but there was a group of businessmen who tried to get Smedley Butler to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt and replace him.
The White House putsch, I think it's called, where I'm from.
Oh, okay. So basically, interestingly, do you guys know who one of the businessmen of interest is who tried to get Smedley Butler to overthrow the FDR? A man by the name of Prescott Bush. Now you know what Prescott Bush. Now you know Prescott Bush was the founder of. He was the founder of the OSS, which later became the CIA, and his son and grandsons became president. And Bush Jr.'s 8-year term was basically Bush Sr.'s extended terms. And so yeah, you basically had a bunch of like we were saying earlier, how the world is controlled by a bunch of very aristocratic, very rich, like old money rich. That makes people, it makes people like Donald Trump look like just hood rich, for lack of a better term, because I mean, Trump's wealth is nothing compared to theirs. And yeah, they realized they couldn't just carry out a direct, direct fascism, direct or like in the older days, feudalism, control the ways things were. And they realized the power of the people, the power of real democracy. So they were like, shit, now we just got to, there's all these democratic institutions in place. Now we have to go in and seize control of them while we uphold them. And in this weird topsy-turvy turn of events, we now live in a world where, left is right, black is white, up is down. Whenever these people go around trying to uphold democracy, spread democracy, speak positively of liberal democracy and all that, it's anything but. It's quite sad because now we bring in the issue back to Taiwan, because when democracy was introduced here, it was already not like liberal democracy in the sense of classical liberal democracy. It had already been turned into this kind of veneer of this sort of deep state globalist what is it, laundering machine, basically, to launder their activities and their messages while making it seem like they're coming from the grassroots. It's quite sinister. And what the only positive thing I can say about what's developed in the US, especially since COVID and all that, when people have seen the largest transfer of wealth in recent history and the clamping down on individual rights and the lack of transparency, is more and more people are waking up to these things. But as as people, you all remember when you guys were first engaging in these sorts of politics, you question a lot of things, and you see certain patterns, you recognize certain realities, but you might not connect all of the dots, and it might fill in the gaps with false information or false consciousness. And these are the people that we really need to reach out to, because you have like the establishment leftists or people who think they're communists, but they really toe the line of the democratic establishment and the financial elites. They'll be like, oh, these people are fascists because they are attributing these certain things, or they're not sufficiently politically correct. It's kind of like, it reminds me back in the days of Republican China, when China was a huge shithole, for lack of a better term. You have a lot of peasants who were like, oh shit, our country is in a state of chaos. Everyone around's being like doped up on opium, and I'm so poor, I need to my neighbor's so poor that he sold his son to this rich couple who couldn't conceive, and sold his daughter to be tongyangxi, like the child. Basically, like what a practice they used to have was like they would buy like a wife for their son when they were both children, and basically, yeah, it's a fucked up practice. There was foot binding, so they were like, this country is worse than ever before, and this country was better when there used to be an emperor. So we need to have an emperor back. Now, China is what it is today because we didn't go that route. But a lot of those people ended up becoming the motive force, the revolutionary subject of the Chinese Revolution, because they were the ones on the ground trying to fight for a better future. And had the communists, I mean, when the Communist Party of China was first started, there were a lot of smug people who were like out of touch. Basically, like they were basically the equivalent of today's like Brooklyn hipsters, like drinking $12 cups of coffee. They would just be like, oh man, those people are hopelessly backwards. We don't need to reach out to them. Listen to me, because I spent some time in the Soviet Union and I learned from the Bolsheviks. But guess who was instrumental in steering China back on the correct path? It was none other than Mao Zedong, who had never traveled abroad. And he had the crazy idea of saying, hey, these peasants, we need to make inroads with them. We need to go deep among them. We need to learn from them, understand their concerns, because they are the toiling masses of this country, and we need to embed ourselves in them. And once we listen to all of their grievances, learn all of their perspectives, we, using our Marxist education and the shit that we know, we formulate policy plans and we explain it to them in ways that are not out of touch, and we learn as we go. And I'm pretty optimistic that this sort of stuff is beginning to happen in more and more places as we see Western hegemony exposing itself. And I think it's quite unfortunate that the people in Ukraine are being
outside of the West itself, because Europe is just doubling down and is putting everything they have on the US winning.
Well, I think at some point when push comes to shove, there will be splits and divergences, and there will be we will hopefully see changes. But what I do want to say is I do not think it's quite unfortunate that the people in Ukraine are essentially being cannon fodder for NATO. This could have ended much earlier had the U.S. just not continued to supply weapons to a war effort that they started, that they know is not going to win, but they just want to use them as a wedge against Russia. Fortunately, I don't think they're dying in vain, because their deaths are illuminating to the rest of the world the true nature of U.S. empire, Western hegemony, Wall Street, the elites on Wall Street and in London, and all these aristocratic families, you know.
Yeah, well, and you know what you're saying about reaching out to as many people as possible and being practical and finding common ground. This is so important, and there are so many people who refuse to do that. They have their ideology, they're purists, and if you don't share their ideology with the sufficient level of purity, they don't want to deal with you. And then what they end up doing is living in a bubble, detached from reality. And just as Barrie said, as his parting words, what are you going to actually do to change things? You look at China and how they're changing things. They're not doing it by talking, by forming endless committees and having endless meetings. They're building stuff. They're like physically changing the country, the land, the landscape, the environment around them to make it a better place for everybody. I think people in the West really need to get back in touch with this. And as an American, I remember growing up, the idea of, say, vocational education was seen as dirty and undesirable. But when you really think about it, those skill sets are what literally builds absolutely everything around you in these big cities. Oh, look who it is.
Hey, guys. Good morning. Good morning, guys. I just woke up.
Wow. And to touch a little bit on what Brian has mentioned, hi, Carl, is that, there is actually obviously there's no perfect system in the world. Absolutely not, right? No perfect system, but we need to, it's not in our pay grade, obviously. The people who are deciding all these things needs to come together and work it out. Even among this panel itself, we don't agree on everything, but we don't go about, fighting each other, bombing your place, that sort of thing. We have to come to an agreement, come to a understanding that I'm not going to be agreeing with you all the time, and yet we don't actually fight over it. Things can be settled like
You're cutting, Noel. You're cutting. Your sound is.
I think we're losing you. Yeah,
we're losing you.
I wanted to add a couple of thoughts on this idea that Barrie threw on the roundtable as to what are you doing. I constantly find myself asking that on WeChat, on Twitter, on even in some of my videos. We are foreigners living here in China, well, most of us, and we see the steps that are being taken towards a hostile development with regards to China and Taiwan and etc. I ask people, like, what are you going to do when things get hot? What are you going to do? Are you going to wait until it's too late to talk, to say anything? Are you just going to pack up your things and run away? We all see what is happening and taking place. And I am often reminding people that you don't wait until the last minute to do something about it. and that's one of the motivators for me to create content. The second part of what I wanted to say is I've taken it upon myself to actually redirect my content to make it as black and white, as contrasty as possible, as in pushing people against the corner. This is what media said, and this is what I am showing you right now. And I've been focusing on how can I do that? How can I show and prove to people that Western media is not telling you the truth? So it's a way to put people into a corner. Either you're going to put your heels on the ground and continue to believe what you've been told, or start to question everything that you've been told. And I think that as a strategy, and I was invited to share my thoughts on this strategy in a Global Times forum here in Xinjiang, and people started just realizing how simple and effective it can be to show, for example, this guy from the World Uyghur Congress saying, "Oh, Muslims in Xinjiang cannot celebrate the end of Ramadan." And I pick up my phone like, "Look, people, these are Muslims celebrating the end of Ramadan." Stuff like that. This guy from VOA saying like, "Oh, if you wear a woven hat in Urumqi, you are deemed a separatist or an extremist." And I'm like, look how many people are going about their lives wearing woven hats. So these are 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 1 minute videos that I am constantly putting under each and every one of these onslaught of lies about China. I'm pretty laser focused on Xinjiang because that's what I've been for the last 5 months. But yeah, I think that that's one approach that works for me as a teacher, somebody with 30 years of experience. My expertise is to try and pinpoint, hey, this is the difference between this and that. So I'm good at focusing on what is going to be that key sentence or that key element that proves one thing or the other being true or false. But let's talk to Carl, who's in America.
Yes.
One second. I would like to plug something here, because Barry asked this question: "What are you doing?" And you already all have an answer. You are already all doing something. I'm not a content creator like you, but I am working in the shadows behind people like you. And I would like to address the audience here, not you guys. Anyone in the audience, so you all who are listening, if you want to get involved, once again, contact me. We are working within Europe and also North America, but also in the rest of the world, with people who are willing to do something to dispel the climate of fear that certain powers are trying to instill in your populations. If you are opposed to conflict with China, if you want to work for a better future with friendship between your country and China, a better future with a multipolar world order and win-win cooperation, as China likes to put it, contact me. We will find a place for you, and ensure that you are given the opportunities to get into contact with people who are trying to achieve the same goals. If you want to do something and answer Barry's question, "What are you doing?" contact us. We will find a place for you. Over to Carl. Sorry.
Carl, you're in the epicenter of building fear against China.
I just woke up, guys. Sorry, I just arrived last night, and my son kept me up all night because he's still jet lagged. Yeah, it's great to see everyone here. And to add to what Fernando was saying, it's right now the lies are so ridiculous. It's so easy to debunk. You just have to show them the reality. None of these VOA, Radio Free Asia people live in like the reality based world anymore. So it's good to see everyone here: Angelo, Brian, Noah, Barrett, Fernando, Xiangyu. Lassie, I don't think I never met Lassie.
We have never met. I have met
Yeah.
most people here. I have never met you. Nice meeting you, Al.
Well, nice to meet you today. Yeah, it's actually a big shock for me to land back in US after 4.5 years. Like I took my family to Carl's Jr. Yes, I took my son to Carl's Jr. and and it was like a one charbroiled burger meal plus 3 pieces chicken tender now costs like over $20. I was like, what the hell? What the hell just happened, man? And but yeah, my mom's like, oh, that's normal, the price being increasing crazy. So everybody's actually paying a price. This is the price increase is part of the sanction, part of the forever war that US has been waging. And like Fernando said, where can you go to escape? If a nuclear war breaks out, there's no place to run. Everybody's gonna get fried. And so thanks to all of you for speaking out. And like people, we need more like different voices right now. I think now is a perfect time because almost everybody, like even in the United States, everybody knew the mainstream media is lying. Nobody trusts the mainstream media. But right now, at the same time, the ecosystem of information is so polluted because we have all these like CIA cutout outlets putting out those lies. So thank you, Fernando, for debugging. Thanks everyone here for debugging, actually. So yeah, I'm just enjoying my morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Carl, how has LA been? Does it feel noticeably more unsafe than when you left?
Well, I mean, like we only spend a night at the LA airport. I mean, I don't think it changed that much, but people were asking me about how's the homeless situation in LA. I just like to say I don't know. Didn't notice any difference. We walked 8 minutes, unheard of in LA. I walked 8 minutes to Carl's Jr. from our hotel, and on the 8-minute walk, we crossed like 3 homeless person, just sleeping on the streets. But I guess that's just normal in LA, like I don't know if it's particularly worse than last 4.5 years. But yeah, my wife is shocked, but I'm just telling her this is just how it is.
I just wanted to bring up a point.
I was just in Ohio in August. My first trip back to the US since 2014, I think, 15.
Wow.
So yeah, it's good to travel again. Although on my visa application, they did ask me to fill out all my social media channels.
Wow.
Yeah, but I got my visa, no problem. I didn't actually fill out all my social media channels. I just did some, right? I mean, who knows? You gotta keep some cuts, close to the chest, right? So anyway, it was a good experience in the US, but of course, I did see some expensive prices. Like for example, overnight parking is like $50 for overnight parking. A spaghetti that I had at the hotel is like $28, which I think is not cheap. So yeah, but all in all, Ohio, when I was at Columbus, it's a nice place. You don't really see like the homeless stuff there. I think it's a nice place there. So yeah, again, the US is big. Of course, there are still concerns from the people that the prices are high. But it's good to see that people are waking up, at least, from the US point of view. People are speaking up. For example, in the recent social media thing about how The Rock and Oprah Winfrey were asking money from the poor Americans to fund their Maui fund. So that is nice to see people are speaking up. and hopefully more and more of these things transpire, and then the people in their place should actually start looking at themselves in the mirror, and why am I doing this? Does The Rock and Oprah really need to do this fund for charity when they can go ask their millionaire friends for some chump change, right? Anyway, I digress.
I just like to say, $20 parking is cheap nowadays. No, $20 parking is cheap in US nowadays. I think, yeah. I mean, like you won't find that in LA for sure.
I think the point I wanted to make is you're seeing all these things happening, and it's painful for quite many people in America. And I mean, even in the past, people who worried about, we have to support Ukraine, we had to stand with Taiwan or whatever, those tend to be like student activists, PMC, the people who are kind of, don't have too many things in real life to worry about. Now, as more and more people have more real issues to worry about, you really think they're going to care about these things, or are they more worried about, hey, everyone around me, even like somebody who like has a college degree, became a homeless crackhead, and I'm like 2 paychecks short of becoming homeless myself. And you go to communities, you have people driving around in pickup trucks with like OnlyFans stickers, like trying to recruit like vulnerable women into doing this. That's people's mothers, people's sisters, people's daughters. They're seeing that happening around them. Do you think they're really going to start worrying about supporting war with some country they can't even find on a map? So the establishment's going to try to connect these issues with China, but more and more people are going to see clear way. I look at China on because people post everything online nowadays. I go on some random YouTube channel and see some video of everyday life in China. There aren't homeless crackheads, and everything's quite normal, and things are affordable. People look happy, and they might start thinking, well, what's wrong with this country? How is China doing this to my country? And people already have an idea. They're already distrustful of the establishment. More and more voices are questioning it. And you're looking at before it's going to be an easy sell. It already is an easy sell, but it's going to only become easier to tell people, hey, the people who are causing problems and causing problems abroad and telling you to support all of these wars that have nothing to do with you, they're the same people that are neglecting you and turning our country into a shithole just to line the pockets of a few financial banksters and oil monopolists to benefit from all of this. And we have nothing to gain from supporting our ruling class in its struggle against these people who are providing alternative economies and systems for the rest of the world, and that we have everything to gain from better relations with China, because our enemies are not in Beijing. They're not the Chinese people on the ground. Our enemies are the same enemies that are trying to undermine the authority of sovereign governments all throughout the world.
Hey, even Trump said that. I think that's everybody by now have recognized that's a fact. I mean, even when Trump says that, and a lot of people cheer for him, I think that's a sign. That's a sign like this. They're losing the grip on the narrative, and but I think China is still a little bit special because a lot of there's like so few sources of like unpolluted source of information on China. People can still easily make up lies about China. I see a few weeks ago, I saw people are circulating like this is photos of empty street on Shanghai and saying China is collapsing. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Shanghai would be great.
Just go to any YouTube channel of any like those YouTubers, expat who are just visiting Shanghai right now, and just look at their video. I mean, like it's. But I think right now, on the other hand, there's more people watching YouTube than watching mainstream media. So there's that, So all of your YouTubers out there, good job.
There's
the necklace.
Speaking of what Xiangyu was talking about earlier, I just had this in mind. I mean, which other country do you hear in their foreign policy address when they use the word enemies? We have to protect against our enemies. I mean, that is if that's not provocation, what is, man?
Yeah,
and did anyone see the
like in military, like our enemies are approaching this position? That's not. Diplomats don't usually say that.
Did anyone see the U.S. Army War College paper, A Call to Action, Lessons from Ukraine for the Future Force? They acknowledge that nobody's buying into the narrative anymore. So the next war, they admit, is going to be costly, and they're going to have to drag thousands of Americans kicking and screaming to the meat grinder because no one is signing up anymore. And the wars that America is trying to provoke now are going to be extremely costly. So I don't know if you said they said they will have like 3,000 casualties a day if they get into a war with, say, Russia or China, and they'll need 800 new soldiers to replace them every single day. That's crazy.
Speaking of which, on September 21st, I'll be the American Institute in Taiwan, basically CIA or the de facto embassy over here is visiting the campus I'm on, the fire training center, because they're trying to like do some shit with like the fire departments and the military working together in case of war. So it should be saying a lot that the AIT is coming here when, hey, the media is trying to present this as a war between just two sides of the strait, but why is America coming in and we're supposed to be like
and they're not even an embassy. AIT is not an embassy.
I know, exactly.
American Institute on Taiwan. What the fuck is that?
Exactly. So I told them, I told my superiors, I'm like, wait, we had to go and like clean their dorm rooms and like move like better beds into them. And I'm like, they're coming over here. They're not even a real embassy. Just give them the shittiest beds we have. But anyways, I'm translating for them on September 21st, and I'm going to be wearing this under my uniform because our uniform, we had to wear a black undershirt. So I have a black undershirt.
Nice.
It says China.
No, I wanted to
think about that
touch on something that somebody was asking in the chat about this social credit score. Noel answered also in the chat, but this is something that you see very educated people, very enlightened people, very well-spoken persons. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but think of, I don't know, a Jordan B. Peterson, or think of other people of large influence with huge platforms that talk about this credit social score. How can China clarify, or how can we, because obviously if they do it, they're going to be talking, oh, that's just a state media, you're denying it. How can this be shaken off? It's like you've got smart people talking about something that is not what it is. This doesn't apply to everyday people. This is not even similar to the credit score in the US, where if you don't have a certain score, you cannot buy a house. And this applies to absolutely everybody applying for a loan or trying to rent a place or buying a car on a lease. No, this is only for people who have defaulted on businesses or deals or whatnot, and the court restricts some of their freedoms. But if you are not in that position, and that could be 95% of the Chinese population, you are not even aware that this exists. So
that's my idea for a vlog into China. Whenever I visit, I'm just gonna go out on the street, do a live stream, and ask everyone, "Do you know your social credit score?" And then just see people's blank face, like, what? What the hell? What the hell are you saying? But this just goes to show that how polluted the information is about China is. It's like even all these debunking articles, coming from like, the famed CCP mouthpiece, like the Foreign Affairs magazine, that says China's social media system is a myth. But like nobody read debunking articles anymore. They just come out with outrageous lies. They may publish a debunking article that nobody sees, but the outrageous lies become a meme and kind of embedded into everybody's consciousness. But that's
China
how
banned
propaganda
iPhone 15. Like what?
Yeah, it's
Well,
just
how about,
crazy how that story's gained traction. It really is. It's like the amount of comments I get about that when I publish videos. It's like, oh, blah blah blah. You're going to be losing your social credit points. And then there was that tweet not long ago where there's I think it's a woman in a supermarket showing the face scan thing. It's oh, now look, because you've got to show your face now to buy things in the supermarket so they can log your social credit points against what you're buying, and people believe it. It's just ridiculous, man. Just
even before the face
ridiculous.
stuff, they could still figure out what you're buying if you just use online shopping. But and one thing I want to mention is, how a lot of people will come back to the social credit score by saying, oh, well, America has FICO, which is very real, and it has very real repercussions on implications on whether or not you can finance a house or do anything of like that level of importance. But another thing I want to mention is how many Americans are aware of ESG scores, short for environmental, social, and governance score? Because basically, these financial institutions are requiring companies to basically be woke enough in their messaging. Otherwise, their scores will lower, and they'll have reduced access to loans. And big corporations like Starbucks need a constant stream of capital to continue operating. How many people know that? Other than like a few, I guess more people are talking about it now, but a lot of people, I feel like more people have heard of the social credit score in China meme than they've heard of the ESG score. And when it comes to the ESG score, hey, countries like China should have something similar to an ESG score, but instead of having a higher score if you're woke, it's more of how a higher score if your company is doing something that's socially responsible, that's actually helping build the country up, that's helping improve the average citizen's life.
Yeah. When this conversation first came up in the
Go, Lassie. So
when this whole conversation first came up in the West around the social credit score and how China has this dystopian system in place that is controlling people's social life and is manipulating them into compliance with the CCP, whatever. I read up some articles from China about this newly introduced system in China, and it all made references to the US credit score system and saying how we, like Chinese people, not me personally, we need to actually review our own systems of how we want to manage credit, how we want to prioritize investments into our own citizens, how we want to ensure that people who are having good ideas for businesses are getting the money they need to succeed, and how people who are striving for actually valuable social goals should get support, even if maybe their credit score isn't so great. And they all said the US has the most comprehensive credit system in the world, and we should first of all look to the US to create our own. So that was the Chinese position. So the Chinese credit score system is literally derived in part from the United States system.
I think that's why a lot of people believe this kind of bullshit about China, because a lot of the talking points about China in the West is all projection. It's all like, because people are so used to kind of the real dystopian condition in their own society, they're willing to believe the same shit is happening in China, because how could they not? How could they not have these kind of dystopian systems? Because we are supposed to be better than China, right? So if whatever we're doing, it must be 10 times worse in China. But because people can't literally envision a world where it's not as fucked up and dystopian than it is at home.
I like to say on my videos and on Twitter and whenever I interact with people that technology and many of the things that China does and implements that are similar in the West, they're just tools. For example, CCTV cameras. I see a lot of comments on CCTV cameras and surveillance and whatnot. Those are tools, and the biggest difference into what you actually do is the craftsman. You can use those CCTV cameras to do evil or to do good. And having been in Xinjiang, I've seen how they actually work. And I mean, Lassie, you'll see what I'll send you. It's very interesting to see the positive utilization of certain tools that are criticized. Oh, AI. Oh, your facial recognition to pay. You're paying with the palm of your hand. Now they have all your data. Well, they have all your data already when you're going to 23andMe. I mean, if you ever had your nose picked during COVID, they already have your DNA. So you're worrying about things that they already have. The idea is, what do these governments do with these tools? Are they tools for the benefit of the population, or are tools that are being used against the population to subvert them, to keep them oppressed, and to, well, eventually one day just control them completely? And it's a matter of trust. Do you
So my
Oh yeah, sorry.
so
yeah, please, Lee. Yeah.
So my son-in-law is a policeman in the British police, right? And we were having a conversation last time I was over there, and I'm going like, in China, like when you travel, you have to show your passport or your ID card at a train station. When you check into a hotel, you need it now. A lot of Westerners go, "Oh my God, that's terrible." People give. My son-in-law says, "That's fantastic." He says, in England, somebody can commit a crime. You could murder somebody in London and then travel on the train, check in a hotel in, I don't know, Scotland, and nobody even know you're there. So he's saying that, a lot of Westerners sort of suggest this is like Big Brother watching you because you have to use your passport or ID card to travel around and check into hotels. My son-in-law, as a policeman, says that's fantastic because that's like really good. It helps you track people, the bad people. And that's what I think, living in China for a long time, I think if you just live in your normal life, you've got nothing to worry about. It's if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing that you need to worry. And that's no different to anywhere, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
Like
And
eliminating online anonymity.
And also,
a lot of people are now complaining about WeChat. Like, oh, you can't get WeChat easily. You need to actually prove who you are, and then if you are abusing people, if you are cheating people, then they come after you. So it's a safer environment because they are eliminating anonymity online. And that's with all social media, even when you put things on Bilibili, on Youku, or whatever. So is what I'm saying. You criticize it as, this is an abuse, this is lack of freedom, when in fact is protecting the people.
Society, yeah.
And I'd like to add one more thing. It's really important. You see, this system, whatever system, from the political system to security and everything, who does it need to please to? You know what? There's only one answer. It needs to please Chinese. Chinese like it, and it's fine. The problem we have in the West that we are actually using our Western lenses to judge something that we have absolutely no clue. And if we are respectful to Chinese, then you know what? They're happy with their system. And that gives legitimacy to their system. Now, we are not happy with our system becomes not legitimate. So it's always like this. Ask the question every time. If you respect those people, whatever, Afghanistan, if they choose Taliban, let them choose. Because if you respect the democracy and their self-determination as well. Because ultimately, you know what, it doesn't need, who cares for the Chinese that this system is liked in the West or not? They don't care. It's working, we're happy, and that's it. It should be fine for us.
I just first like to say welcome, Alex. It's always good to see you. Yeah. Big fan. And what Angelo said, it reminded me there's actually a big attitude difference in the China versus West in the people's view of technology. In China, people's view of technology is generally positive. They see that as something that helps to improve their life. Whereas in the West, people generally see technology as more dystopian. But I understand, from the Western perspective, because it's true. In the West, the government often uses technology to do all this Black Mirror dystopian shit to individuals. And this is why they can extrapolate and project the same condition to China, like all the Western mainstream medias do, because they know about people's fears, and they project those same fears the people have about their own government in their own Western society onto China. But in China, it's a totally different attitude. Like, I asked my cousin when I was in China in 2019 about the cameras and all that. They didn't give a shit. They don't give a fuck. And another thing I would like to notice, whatever those camera did, one thing I did notice is people in Hangzhou and Shanghai, people are lining up right now. People are obeying traffic laws. I thought it was great, man, because it was a big change from my last visit like 10 years ago. But in Hangzhou, Shanghai, at least all the big coastal cities in the east, people are orderly. They're not like, running across the street in the middle of the traffic, and it's great. Everything works.
Yeah.
Actually,
this is sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to go first?
Sure. I just wanted to add I want to do the synthesis between the two views. We have in Germany very strong feelings about security and our own personal data and the security surrounding that data, which is actually holding us back as a society, because everybody's medical data, for example, is completely untouchable under German law, under European law in general, under the GDPR, it's called. So people have very strong feelings about that. They would never want their identity shared, the data shared, analyzed and used against them, or in any other way used. So yeah, there's a difference in attitude, first of all, between the two societies, right? And people need to, as Angelo said, self-determine for themselves how they want their society to be run. There is no such thing as a wrong or right answer here. Some people in the chat I saw say, like Fermubi is naive. He's an idiot for believing the government will ever do anything good with your data. But the fact of the matter is, Chinese people disagree, and so far it's working perfectly fine for them. However, once again, as a Westerner, I would have my very strong feelings about this, because I can see the United States is the single most totalitarian surveillance state in world history. It's the most militarized police state in world history. It has the highest amount of prisoners in the world. Do I trust that government with my data? Probably not. So obviously Americans will have a very strong and different attitude towards how that data is used, right? And Germans themselves are also concerned about this because of our history with the Nazis and so on. We don't want any government having our data, especially not our genetic data, our medical data. No, because we know what happens.
And I just like to add, I think most people here, hold Western passport, whatever. So like, it doesn't, for me, it's mind-boggling why these Westerners concerned about China surveillance or whatever. Chinese government have no jurisdiction over me. I don't care if China have my data. They can't do anything to me. Whereas if the FBI, the NSA, all these three-letter agencies have my data, I have real problems. And this is why, like, I rather, people say Huawei is a spy phone. It's like, fine, take my data. I don't care. Like, Huawei can have all my data. They can't do anything to me. But if the CIA, FBI decide I'm a threat, they decide. Right now, they don't care because I'm not making enough waves. But we've seen examples of what happened to Julian Assange. Right? It's a real issue. That's a real concern. And people in the West, in particular, who hold Western passport, man, you don't need to worry about Chinese government. Like, even if everything they said is true about Chinese surveillance, what can Chinese government do to you, man? They can't. They don't have jurisdiction over you. But U.S. always have jurisdiction over you, no matter who you are, what citizenship you hold. Julian Assange is not even American. He's being held right now. So yeah.
I think earlier we were talking about how these disinformation campaigns about China become so believable because it is projection and people see it happening in the U.S. And there's an added layer to that in Taiwan because a lot of the things that the Chinese mainland, the CPC, are accused of doing today is basically stuff that the KMT did do back in the days of martial law. And the logic now is, well, the KMT is a bunch of, especially younger people who have less contact, immediate ties with the mainland. The logic is, well, the KMT was a brutal dictatorship and they came from the Chinese mainland, and the CPC must be just like the red version of that. And it must be worse because on top of that, the very real experience like their parents or grandparents' generation went through in Taiwan, there was also the anti-communist propaganda that never went challenged because, like I said, the separatist movement, the DPP, they were also propped up by the U.S. to keep the KMT under control. So it's anti-KMT, anti-Zhang, but not anti-US. So there's that factor. And what was I gonna say? And what's really scary is these people, this is how powerful psyops are, because the people here, when we speak the same language and we can directly read information coming from the mainland or talk to the people on the ground, but there is this sort of thing that some young liberals will do, which is, well, if someone from the mainland speaks positively of the things, and they're brainwashed. But if they speak negatively, then they're reliable and we must listen to them. And the other day I was with family, they were like some of my more PMC minded cousins who are like separatist minded. And they were talking about how on, they described it as 某个邻国, like some neighboring country, whatever, entitled to their own views, I suppose, even though they're wrong. How even if their houses flood, they have to thank the party, and how they find that to be very scary, and how they can't wait to see until everything collapses over there. And I'm just like, people here thought it was going to collapse in the 90s, and you know what? If you thought the CPC was going to collapse in the 90s, at least back then you weren't crazy, because you saw the rest of the socialist bloc collapse. But thinking that it's going to collapse in 2023, you're just rhymes with regarded.
Gordon Chang related.
Oh, hey, I respect his what's the word? His determination and his persistence. I just don't envy his intelligence.
He's got a good hustle, man. The bro's been doing the same shit for 30 years, and he's still getting paid, and he's still getting invited to CNN. I mean, that's a great gig.
That's consistency. He's got that, huh?
Yeah, only America. It's a great country. You can always fail to the top. This is why U.S. is the greatest country in the world. If you just say the party line, just say what people want to hear, you're going to the places, man.
Let's say hi to Alex.
Hey,
Alex,
hi guys. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be an interesting 6 months to 12 months for this Chinese economy. This economy is not as strong as I think maybe some people on the panel think. This is going to be a pretty interesting time for the next 6 to 12 months here. There is some deep issues with the economy here. Of course, we'd like to always talk about prosperity and the movement forward, but I think this government's going to have a challenge here in the next 6 to 12 months dealing with many things. One of them is, as we see, the new energy vehicle market is going to come under attack. And that was one of the special mandates here in the country here over this year and next year, was to really put a lot of attention into new energy vehicles, into the promotion, into the logistics, into getting them through the Belt Road, getting them through the International Land Sea Trade Corridor, getting them through the Chongqing-Chengdu Economic Circle. This was a massive mandate, major pushback by the Europeans on it immediately, as we saw just a few days ago. And youth unemployment is actually, it is having its effects. And I mean, a lot of these kids are getting out of school, getting out of university. Some of them are coming back from America with, their parents have invested, probably 20 years of their lives to pay for their education. They're coming back and they're saying, wait a minute, these jobs aren't here. So I think we're going to see a transition here over the maybe 6 to 12 months, maybe 18 months, where we might see a little bit of shock to the system unless they pull the stimulus tab and go for it. But I'm not so convinced. And I think we're going to probably see 18 months of maybe flat growth unless the government hits the, the QE button here, which they're entitled to. But once again, as we've seen in other countries around the world, when you raise interest rates 13 consecutive times, that trade is going to come out somewhere. Either that trade is going to come out in the middle class, that's mortgages are going to be reset here in the next 12 months to 18 months. It's bad times ahead. So if we see the rest of the world collapsing or having a difficult time here, this is going to be a challenge for China. They've got to sell their exports or goods. I mean, this is a country that has 120 countries as their number one trading partner. Okay, 152 on the Belt Road, and 33% of the exports that leave this country are from American companies. So could be an interesting time, guys.
I agree with this. So I wanted to ask Carl a question based on this. I've been given 2 questions by a friend of mine that I was supposed to bring to this panel. I did exactly this, but now it came to this point where Alex raises this point. 2 questions. From China's perspective, is there an American president who would be like a presidential candidate who would be the preferred president? And secondly, is there something that's forcing China to distract from political or economic internal troubles? And how will China try and distract people if that is the case? Sorry, I was just translating from German. So first of all, presidential candidates, preferred presidential candidate, and secondly, how will China distract its people from its economic troubles?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, right now in US, we're just basically looking at either Biden or Trump. So great choices, guys. And I can't speak for CPC official, unlike many people on the internet thinks. I don't have a direct line to Zongnanhai, right? Like, I don't know what Xi Jinping thinks. But I think from my perspective, I think if anything, Trump will be a more interesting choice because Biden, what you're gonna get. Biden is you're just gonna get a continuation of the same Chinese sanctions as he has been imposing on China. Trump is a wild card. You have no idea what he's gonna do. So who knows? But he also does a lot of damage to the U.S. alliance, the empire's alliance system with the U.S. allies or U.S. vassal states. So Trump is a disruptor in that case, and he, in fact, in Trump's first term, they have to sort out what their China policies for a while because they kind of disrupted the plan that was being laid down for a Hillary presidency, which what we're seeing under Trump right now is basically what they would have done back in 2016 if Hillary was elected president. And so if I was China, if I'm Xi Jinping, I'm not, but if I was, I would be interested to see what happens if Trump gets reelected again. So the second part of the question.
That's a morbid curiosity.
So the second question is about what would China do to distract its public? I think right now the Chinese leadership have enough on their plate just to keep the ball rolling, especially with the Chinese economy. Because Alex is right, Chinese economy is slowing down. It's one of the more serious slowdowns in decades. But I think it's more of a my personal opinion. This is a big cyclical downturn that China will pull out of eventually. But that's what the Chinese leadership have to work very hard just to keep 1.4 billion people fed and hundreds of millions of young people who are just graduating to make sure they have a job prospect. So they have their plate full. How would they distract? I mean, I don't know, like, because I know what people think. People in the West are always thinking like, the tail that wags the dog, right? Like a war is always a good distraction because that's what US does. That's what that's exactly what US does. US would freaking start everybody kind of feel like the reason US got involved in the Yugoslavian war is because Bill Clinton can't keep his wieners in his pants, and everybody kind of implicitly understand that in America. That's why they think same dynamic must also happen in China. But I think the Chinese leadership, they face some real serious challenges, just to keep people fed, keep making sure people have jobs. I think they'll be too busy to worry about, like distraction right now. Like there's certainly not going to be an invasion of Taiwan. I mean, people are talking about
definitely not, because it would actually complicate the situation further. So
exactly, and also there's a big important signal the Chinese government just sent out recently. A lot of people probably missed it. Is they're rolling out this what they call they're making the province opposite of Taiwan, Fujian province, the integration demonstration zone for Taiwan. And what they're doing, they're pouring a lot of investment. They're providing a lot of incentive for the Taiwanese people to come work and live there. And this is, for me, this is a clear signal the Chinese government has sent there will be no war because Fujian province for most of the Cold War was left undeveloped because of the threat of war. Because the Fujian province was right on the Taiwan Strait. It was on the forefront of the Taiwan Strait tensions. So for decades, the entire Fujian coastline was left undeveloped. It only started to develop in the 1980s. That's actually right around when Xi Jinping was a governor in Fujian. But the fact that they're pouring a lot of investment, giving a lot of preferential treatment to Fujian, that means they intend to develop the place. That means they're not expecting that place to get smashed in a World War III situation. So that's a clear indication to me that Chinese government is sending out, say there's not going to be a war across the Taiwan Strait. I think that's what everybody else in the world cares about. And so we don't. That's one scenario we can take off, the worry list. That's my take.
I'd like to add to what Alex was saying. Some of the concerns that we should all be aware of, and one of them is demographics here in China. I mean, it's not different from demographics all over the world, but the issue of the aging population in China, it's only going to become more and more serious. It's going to become more and more expensive to look after them, pay the pensions and health care and all these things. So that's something that the government is starting to unveil programs for community care for elderly. I recently visited a place in Shanghai, where 25% of the population are older than 60. And some of the programs that are being developed are really, really interesting. So it's something that, if you're interested in China, it would be important to keep an eye on. I also would like to kind of tangentially connect to some of the educational reforms that were done a few years ago, like 2-3 years ago, with the double redundancy, the canceling of all this competitiveness to send children to the best universities possible. Basically, the message that they were trying to send is not everybody has to be a professional. Not everybody has to be the best, just magna cum laude. Not everybody has to go to the best universities. There's vocational training. There's different trades and different things that people can pursue. So these depressurizing the family stress to give a better life for the kids in traditional pathways was something that I particularly connected the dots there. And thirdly, probably longer term than what Alex was mentioning, the 6 months to the 18 months. But as the influence of America begins to dry out around the world and China's increases or replaces it or substitutes it in places like America, in places like Latin America, in places like Africa or Latin America, those places will see Chinese employees, Chinese investors, Chinese workers, Chinese people like us who came to China to venture and create our path, right? But opposite to us will be Chinese going abroad and doing these things in developing countries where the opportunities will be. Will that be 5 years? Will that be 10 years? I don't know. But that's a dynamic that I think is going to be at play here when it comes to employability of this population that is coming of age and graduating and a little bit in limbo, not knowing where things are going to go.
Just one thing. I think Alex is leaving. Yeah, you're leaving, Alex.
Take care, guys.
You get it. Yeah. Sorry.
I gotta go.
That was a short trip, but thank you, Alex.
Angelo will explain. Chat later, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alex. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Alex has got the RT interview just right now. That's why. Sorry, Fernando. Please keep on.
No. That was it. I think that the element of the demographics, the population, and these younger people that are returning to China because of the situations in the United States, they're going to be able to find opportunities in these spheres of influence where China is growing, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. And I think that is going to be the case in the midterm. It's not going to be quick, but it's going to be the funnel for all this talent, for all this skill.
Great. Who wants to jump in? No, you guys just mentioned just before. You mentioned this province in Fujian, those investments. Remember, there's this is actually very similar to what the DPRK did, right? The DPRK actually opened a zone, and they were actually doing some co-investment with South Korea, and this was torpedoed by the US. So I think the initiative is just amazing, But I think what is a pity is that I wish that I don't know how many Taiwanese are in mainland China. I have the figures between 1 and 2 million, but I wish those Taiwanese had a voice, because I tell you, probably 95% of them, they just love so much China. They're so different, and I see these two different Taiwan. There's a Taiwanese. I think there's a split between the old generation, the young generation, but also those Taiwanese like from Taipei and the Taiwanese from the south. It makes me think about like this divide that we have in the US. The ones from the south, they just stay in this small area, and while people from Taipei, which is a large proportion of the population of Taiwan, are much more open to and they have less this sense of local identity that has been built up. What is your take, Xiangyu? There's a microphone. Xiangyu, you need to put your microphone.
Sorry, Angelo. So I need to actually take off to another errand. Thanks for having me on tonight, and I'll see you guys next time.
Take care now.
Yes.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you. Bye-bye.
Hi, Noah.
I think
And
I
Xiangyu,
feel-
before you answer that question, were you about to launch the nukes? We all saw you getting
He's sitting in
prepared
some
your-
bunker, yeah.
oh no, because I just got back. I just got back to campus, and I just wanted to get everything cleaned up so I can just go to sleep whenever I'm ready. But yeah, no, I understand, Angelo. I understand the point you're trying to make, and for the most part, that is true. But the whole thing about Taipei is this: you'll find that when you say open, the key word is open, as in George Soros's open society. People in Taipei, there's when it comes to like the professional managerial class, white collar workers, the student activists, and those types of people that make up a lot of the people in Taipei, they are much more domesticated by empire, whereas some people on the ground, they might have their local identity and they might be wary of outsiders or whatever a little bit more, but they're more fundamental. Their culture, day-to-day culture, is much more untainted, I would say, and much more traditional Chinese than some like young cosmopolitan professional in Taipei. But yeah, I mean, there's always been a lot of contact between the two sides, except for those few decades. And Taiwan being separated from the mainland is a historical anomaly ever since we've been formally incorporated into China 400 years ago. So just as quickly as as people's self-identification changed due to NGOs and this sort of top-down revision of education, it'll change as soon as people, as to put it in crass terms, when Uncle Sam can no longer pay for his blowjobs from Taiwanese activists and NGOs, that's when everything's going to start shifting. Because this is what's happening. Think of so people have fond in Taiwan. Part of the reason why it's so difficult for them to stop looking at the U.S. positively is this: objectively, Taiwan did prosper under a global value chain headed by the U.S., especially in the 70s and 80s. But the problem is that global value chain no longer really exists. And the problem with that global value chain is when the Chinese mainland joined, what happened was it got all these tech transfers, and then it's on its way to creating an alternative global value chain. So now the U.S. is like, oh shit, we're just going to destroy it for the sake of maintaining the profits of a few banksters. We're gonna just destroy everything. We're gonna destroy the value chain just so nobody else can prosper. And that's why you're seeing all this like Malthusianism, like degrowth, all of this stuff. And imagine you're at a party. The U.S. is the host of the party, and all the crystal is gone, and all the fancy stuff is gone, and now all you have is Bud Light. Now people are just leaving the party because they know, okay, this party's starting to get lame, it's starting to get whack. But you have some people, who are like fear of missing out, who are staying and like drinking the Bud Light. Oh, and the U.S. is like, you know what? Now you're gonna have to pay for the Bud Light, and people I guess the administration in Taiwan are still staying because there's that fear of missing out. And to get its message across, the U.S. is burning its furniture and throwing it on the front lawn to tell you to get out, but you still have some ankle biters and some people reluctant to leave. But at the same time, Taiwan happens to have a geopolitical significance, so of course the U.S. still wants to keep Taiwan under its thumb to ensure that the island chain that's surrounding their Eurasian continent isn't broken.
Can someone tell me what's going on with Taiwan trying to, will the company building the chip factory in Arizona and then not having enough employees in the US? And then even if they get it up and running, they still have to send the chips back to Taiwan to get finished. What is going on with that? Yeah, Lee, do you know anything about that? The details about
it's a bit of a disaster. They've got issues to start with. They don't have enough construction workers in the US who have the skills to install and build the plant. So TSMC's answer was they were going to ship a load of people over from Taiwan to help But then the American unions have got really pissed with that because they're saying it's like, and then there's all issues about safety on the site. The Americans are saying that it's not being run safely enough. And then, so that's one issue. The next issue is that
So
when
is
they
this
do
actually
actually,
a valid concern, or is this just American workers being reticent?
I really don't know. The latest I'd heard was that these Taiwanese that they wanted to get over there to help build and kit out the plant, they were still waiting for the visas to be issued. Whether that's happened yet or not, I don't know. Then moving on to the second reason is when the plant is actually finished, they don't have enough skilled workers in the US to actually man the plant. And one of the things that came up, they were saying, well, because of the work ethic in Asia, so you're probably aware a semiconductor production line is very, everything has to be working just hunky-dory. One small thing in the whole production is wrong, the whole thing doesn't work. What they were saying that, at 3 a.m. In Taiwan, if there's a problem, they can get on the phone and the engineer will be there like within the hour. And they're saying this is getting like major pushback in the US because they go, well, you can fucking wait till next morning kind of thing. So the work ethic. I don't know whether any of you have seen the Netflix documentary American Factory, but that is an absolute eye-opener. It's about an American glass company, a Chinese glass company that tried to open a factory in the US, and they had all sorts of problems, and most of the problems were because of American workers and unions.
I wonder what Xiangyu has to say about this, actually, because he's the unapologetically socialist person on this panel.
Let me just finish and address Brian's point. So the other thing is that TSMC is saying that if you want to buy chips that are made at the US plant, they may be up to 30% more expensive than the Taiwanese chips at the Taiwanese plant. So, customers are not easily going to accept. They go, well, you can have them from here, but you're going to have to pay 30% more. And then, like you said, they don't have a packaging plant. And when we talk about packaging, we mean the actual chips from the wafers, not putting the chips into boxes. It's the wafers that have to stick. They haven't got advanced packaging plant in the US, so they're going to have to ship them back to Taiwan to be packaged. So it's a bit of a disaster. It was meant to be sort of Biden's CHIPS Act sort of, big thing, and it's turning into more and more of a disaster all the time. So,
the CHIPS Act is still
guys. Sorry, I need to get going. Thank you so much, Angelo, and everybody. It's great to see you guys. Great
Fernando.
to put together this content with you. And until see you again, take it easy. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Take care.
Meeting you. Bye-bye.
But logistically, this is a disaster. But the CHIPS Act was always about tech transfers. So basically, any company that gets subsidies from the U.S. to do its chip development now has to give its latest technology to the U.S., which it'll inevitably share with U.S. chip companies. Because with every generation of chips, you're basically gambling with God, because there's only a certain few ways to design it, but you don't know which, you choose one of the ways, but you're never sure if it works until you try it. So you have companies like Samsung, TSMC, whatever, doing this, and their R&D may fail. So that's why no company can stay at top forever, which is why I'm really concerned about Taiwan's economy, because right now, if you get TSMC out of the picture, our economic growth is negative. So, and knowing that TSMC won't stay on top forever, and on top of that, you have these forced tech transfers, which guarantee that it's not going to stay on top forever. What's the future going to be like? So basically, the CHIPS Act is like, okay, these companies get subsidies from the U.S. and we're gonna make them share their latest technology with us, so we don't have to gamble with God, because they're gonna do it, and we're gonna get it. We're gonna get the results of the research anyways. And the other factor is, the U.S. currency is fiat currency. It's not backed by any gold. It's not backed by anything physical. It's backed by faith in the government. And what faith in the government means is essentially a lot of the world's most valuable commodities, global commodities, are traded in the U.S. dollar. So that you're talking about oil, you're talking about these sorts of chips, and of course TSMC and Samsung trade their chips in the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. this means a lot because the U.S. has become a debtor country since 1985. So because the U.S. dollar is the default reserve currency, that means most of the debts in this world are issued in U.S. dollars, which means the U.S. can return just by printing out more dollars at the expense of causing inflation, of course. Now, the U.S. is bringing out about chips because let's say the Chinese mainland, they catch up in their technology, and they recently broke the 7 nanometer threshold, and the gap is closing. How quickly they can catch up and surpass these companies is another issue, but since the gap is closing, it's a matter of time. Now they're going to start selling their chips in the RMB, which is a blow to US dollar hegemony, which the US is basically an attack on US interest and US hegemony. So that's another factor to be thinking about, and why the US is acting so desperate lately.
Yeah, interestingly, a lot of people are not aware, but these latest cutting edge chips at the sort of 3 nanometer, they only actually account for quite a small amount of the global chips. A majority of chips are at legacy nodes, and that's where China's. I mean, I read somewhere they're looking at opening like 15 or 20 fabs over the next like 2 or 3 years to manufacture sort of more legacy node chips. And that's where really the big market is. So that's really going to affect, like, you've even had the CEO of Intel saying, look, if we're going to lose China as our major customer because of the sanctions, we just won't need all these fabs in the US because there'll be nowhere to sell the chips to. So that's another factor, I think.
It's like the US is doing the exact same thing with China that it just got done doing with Russia. It thought it was going to put all these sanctions on Russia and just collapse Russia. But what happened instead was it all blew up in their face and in the face of their allies. And it looks like the exact same thing is happening with all these attempted sanctions on China. All of these chip companies are complaining about you just cut us off from our largest market, and the money that we were making by selling chips to China, we were using for R&D. Now we have less money for R&D, which means we're inevitably going to fall behind, because it is a matter of what you invest is what you're going to get out of it. If you're investing less, you get out less. So it's a self-feeding loop that the U.S. has created because they are fixated with this premise that they should maintain hegemony. And that is not negotiable. So everything else, they're willing to try anything to maintain this, and it's not working. It cannot work. Premise is flawed.
I mean, if you look at the statements that CEOs of places like Nvidia, Intel, ASML are making, it's like this is the wrong way to go about it. You're just forcing China to become a major competitor, whereas had they have not done that, China would keep happily buying the chips. And the other thing, a lot of the West will go, oh well, China is so far behind, why has it took them so long? It's because up until fairly recently, they didn't even try to reinvent the wheel. They thought, well, why do we need to build an EUV machine? Because we can buy one from the Dutch. That's their thing. They didn't think, oh well, we need to build it. It's only since the last 5 to 7 years that they've realized the tables have turned and they're not going to be able to buy this stuff from the West, that they've started. And it is difficult what they're trying to do. EUV is a very difficult thing, but as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of programs now going on in China for different paths of development. They're not just concentrating on one path. They have numerous paths that they're working on. And it may even be possible that they can leapfrog the West, because I think, as I said earlier, silicon is coming to the end of its life cycle. They can't push it much further. but there's alternative technologies. There's graphene, there's GaN, there's some new 2D material, which is, and then they're working on like optical chips. So instead of electrical pulses, it's light pulses, and these are infinitely faster and infinitely more power efficient. So if they crack one of those technologies, they will actually leapfrog, you know, the current technology. So there's a lot going on. So, but the other thing as well, China are not in this massive race because time's on their side. You know, to China, 5 to 10 years is not a big deal to them. Whereas in the West, you've got these election cycles. So it's, oh God, we've got to do something now because, you know, we need to get re-elected. That doesn't even come into play with China. They know they've got time on the side. That's my thoughts on it.
Yep.
Yeah, I just like to remind people, the Huawei chief, Huawei founder Ren Zhengfei, he always said he was a great admirer of the United States, and he was the biggest fan. And back in 2000, I think it was 2003, he almost sold his company Huawei to Motorola, right? And now Motorola, that was reported by Financial Times in 2019. In the end, it was Motorola that decided not to go through with the deal. You know, otherwise Huawei could have been part of Motorola, and now Motorola is a brand under Chinese company Lenovo. I mean, things have really changed, and also like China is importing over $400 billion of chips. You know, China spend more money importing chips and importing oil, and the Chinese dependency on chips would continue to grow if there hadn't been a U.S. sanction. You know, because China was perfectly happy to source their chips from Qualcomm, from have their chips made in TSMC, but it's United States that's putting an end to this process, and that's forcing the Chinese to indigenize. And now all the Chinese industries are in it together. It's do or die. Before they had an option, they're like, why do I need to go with the semiconductor producer SMIC when I can just go to TSMC and have them make it cheaper and more, you know, the most cutting edge and most reliable? Now they don't have a choice. They can't go to TSMC. They can't go to Qualcomm. They have to design everything themselves. And I mean, nowadays it's not rocket science. You know, you just literally throwing billions of dollars and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, to engineer on this thing. It's just a matter of time when China will solve that problem. We're just talking about whether it's going to happen in the next 5 years or 7 years. And
it's been
And like you said, we are already reaching the limit of physics here currently with like 5 nanometer and 3 nanometer. So TSMC and these folks, they need a big breakthrough to go even putting smaller chips out. And in the meantime, China have plenty of time to catch up. And I think that's just going to happen. That's just my take.
Well, the 5G modem in Huawei's Mate 60 Pro, it's proven to be faster than a lot of the American 5G modems. And so Qualcomm have already lost a huge amount of Huawei's business. And now there's rumors that people like Xiaomi and Oppo might switch their 5G modem chips to domestic suppliers as well. So Qualcomm, like overnight, will lose billions and billions of dollars because those other Chinese companies will possibly start buying the domestic 5G modems from, you know, suppliers within China and not use Qualcomm. So they've really shot themselves in the foot. The US have big time.
Qualcomm's biggest market, if people can look up on Google on the earnings of Qualcomm, their biggest market by far is China. Like it's like the U.S. market for Qualcomm doesn't even compare to this. Well, the U.S. market for Qualcomm doesn't even compare anywhere close to the Chinese market size for Qualcomm. And Well, I mean, right now there's still other Chinese phone companies like Xiaomi or that's allowed to import Qualcomm chips and use in their components. But like you said, that's if Huawei comes out with a better 5G chips, there's no reason for the other Chinese companies to continue to source from Qualcomm.
Exactly. You know, so yeah, they've shot themselves in the foot big time. I was with a fairly high level Huawei executive. It was about 2 years ago now at a dinner, and I put it to him. I says, "Look, you know, why didn't Huawei develop their own chips?" Oh, well, there was no need to because we were happy just to buy them from companies in the US. But now they've done that, it just pushes us to develop our own. And basically, he says, once we've developed our own, there's no way we'll ever go back. Even if they come and say, "Oh yeah, you can buy them again," he says it'll be too late. You know, they've shot it. You know, so.
But that's what they proved by doing that. Is they've weaponized everything, and now they weaponize chips, and now no one trusts them. And every other country, not just within China, but every other country has to start asking themselves, will they do it to us next?
Sure. I'm pretty sure most other like phone manufacturers in China will be looking at their supply chains and localizing more and more of them over, because they could be next. You know, the US could turn around tomorrow and go, "Oh, we're not going to supply chips to Xiaomi or Oppo." So they'll have a plan B now that they've seen what happened to Huawei for sure.
Yeah, I think China they have a vision on this confrontation. They already envisioned this a long time ago. When you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, this whole idea, they were already 15 years ago. They already knew that the confrontation, the biggest risk was on sea. You know, the Malacca Strait, and they had to find other solutions. And I would say actually China even. You see this process of de-dollarization seen by the West and by the US. That's de facto war declaration, and this has started a long time ago. It didn't start yesterday. It didn't start when Putin started wanting rubles against the gas or oil. China started doing it a long time ago. Even the Belt and Road Initiative. When you look at the whole idea, it's China had a trade surplus, US dollar trade surplus, basically selling more than what he was buying. So you end up with a lot of dollars, and you had to fund the Ponzi scheme, like buying US debts. What China did was actually investing to the Belt and Road Initiative. So with this, it was actually killing many birds with one stone. You bypass the Malacca Strait. You do an integration of Eurasia. You shift the world's gravity, economic gravity, towards Asia. You actually give access, you help your neighbors, you give yourself access to new markets and also sourcing material. And most important, really, you recycle your dollar in tangible assets. So you see, so I would say China, I think the biggest advantage when you look at those two confrontations is just, and we talk about it quite a lot with Brian, is that the idea that China is they do things purpose-driven more than profit-driven. Everything, you know, and this is strategic component in terms of self-sufficiency and national security. The only thing where China, I was actually quite surprised that actually the steps of being self-sufficient on the microchips was quite late. But other than that, China did everything absolutely right. What is it?
Carl needs to leave. Bye, Carl. Nice meeting you.
I got it wrong. Thanks for the invite, Angelo. I'll come. Invite me back anytime. I love to talk.
Pleasure.
Take care, man.
The Wild West there, Carl.
Listen, I'm going to run as well because I got to be up pretty early in the morning. So
yeah, so do I.
Thanks
very
for
lovely.
The show, Angelo.
Maybe it's a good time to wrap it up because it's like almost
we wrap it up.
Way past 3 hours. I wasn't feeling well. I said I'm just going to do 1 hour. Now it's like 2.5.
No, I want to thank you guys, but I think it was a very good vibes, very good atmosphere. I think we'll do this again. You know, I think it's good. You know, we need to.
Sure.
we need to speak out, and I think it's a good pool, like-minded people. So I'd like to thank you guys, and we'll do that again. Hopefully, I mean, every Sunday we'll try. Yeah.
Just one thing. I've got a project that I'm doing with Harald. It's been a bit delayed because I've been traveling, but it's kind of a live stream, a bit of a show like Redacted, where it's very professionally produced. I've bought a load of equipment, and we will have guests on. It won't be like 6 or 8. It'll be like two at a time. So, but you guys are very welcome to come on and give your views. So I'll let you know once we're a bit more down the line with that.
Sounds
but
good.
it's been great tonight. I haven't done a live for ages, so it's been good to get back into it. And have a good Monday, you guys.
Yeah,
Have a good one, you
likewise.
guys.
Yeah, thank you very much for
Ta-ra.
having me on. It was nice seeing you again. Nice being on here on a show with Lee and how do you say your name? Lassie?
Lassie.
Lassie?
Yeah, like
the first
diarrhea
time?
in Chinese. There you go.
And, nice being on with you again, Brian and Angelo.
Yes.
Very lovely being back on, and always thank you very much for this opportunity. And also, I'd like to give a little quick shout out to the comments section. See some familiar names. Just thanks for tuning in.
I'm giving my shout out to Tone Malone, who called me a fascist shilling for Europe. Thank you for that
Yeah,
feedback.
I think so. We have some room for improvement. Maybe get a moderator or something next time, Angelo. So we shouldn't have people calling us heroin addicts, since it's just a bad look.
Yeah, that was very low, by the way, Tone Malone. I don't mind being called fascist shill, but calling Barrie a heroin addict, and that is just weird.
These kind of comments.
Got a comment saying that you should invite Haz on. I second that. I think he's a very interesting voice. That
Yeah, Haz is a good guy.
You mean Haz or Haza?
Haz. The guy that,
the infrared guy, no? Infrared.
Yeah.
Oh.
The guy who Asatar Bear called him Hayes. Who the fuck says that, Hayes? Nazis say that shit. That guy.
Oh, Angela, it's a totally different guy than Hazar. I don't think anyone would request Hazar.
No, not the Hazard. Not the Hazard. We can just a second. It's one of those foreigners in China. He was like singing, was famous, and then he went to Australia, and now he's actually turning. He's
like
back
the other way.
He's like an ASPE. Is he an ASPE resident fellow yet?
Yeah.
This is really bad.
He's talking about how China tried to turn him into a spy or something.
Exactly. That's him. That's him. I think
it's
some jokes. Just the losers, really. So we
sure.
got a few of them. Actually, there's actually a Twitter channel that actually I think his name is Peter Duke. He's actually exposing all those. China Watcher. Very interesting. Very interesting channel.
It is good. Yeah, it's a good channel. That is.
Yeah. I'm actually surprised, Xiangyu, that you are suggesting Haz, considering he seems to be very much of the Nazbol.
No, I think read his Substack. It's easy to call people Nazbols, but you look at actual successful socialist revolutions in history, they do take on a national character, and what he is suggesting is not some sort of synthesis between fascism and communism, as people suggest. He's definitely not that. I suggest him really just engaging with his content, which is why I suggest having him on, so you can ask him these sorts of questions and decide for yourself whether or not he's a Nazbol. I am not in agreement with the idea that he's a Nazbol. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Good to know. I know very little about him, but cool.
No, we're not having NAFO on. No, thank you.
North Atlantic
NAFO
furry organization.
Take care, guys.
See you
guys.
guys.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much. Bye bye.
All right.